Chapter 161, A Scheme of False Peace. Victor paused, then set his large hand against his head. Even as a stone man, he had retained enough of his old humanity to read his lord's thoughts. He knew why Doom cared about the 2 billion people the Heranian had taken. They were a priceless asset he wanted to save. Victor scratched his scalp, eyes flickering, and his voice came out hesitant. "My method is a little despicable." "Speak plainly," Doom said with an encouraging smile. "The final decision is mine." Relieved by that permission, Victor let out a long breath and stopped worrying about the consequences. He laid out his plan bluntly: arrange a fake peace to trade for the people, then use extinction weapons to annihilate the Heranian. Doom nodded slowly. Victor's motive struck a chord. Those 2 billion captives were not just numbers. They were members of the military alliance, people plundered long ago, now trapped in the black hole cluster where time crawled for them. The present-day military alliance owed its lineage to those stolen people. The current members were several generations removed from those original captives. Saving those people would be a tremendous gift, a way to secure the military alliance's loyalty. Having territories within Nur's sphere of influence submit completely to him would be strategically invaluable. "That's impossible," Sophia erupted, appearing at once, her stern gaze fixed on Victor. The Lord's glory cannot be sullied by betrayal. Her usual calm, rational demeanor had vanished. Eyes wide with anger, she turned on the stone man artisan. "Have you lost all sense of judgment? Have you considered the consequences of this plan?" Victor opened his mouth but said nothing in reply. Doom stepped forward, his voice slow and steady, trying to soothe her. "Don't blame him, Sophia. I told him to speak freely." "I have thought it through," Victor said at last. "There is no other way to make this plan work." His face hardened, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. "When dealing with the Heranians, we sometimes have to set aside shame and morality. They are not worthy of our trust." Sophia's expression turned anxious. She wanted to stop her master's terrible plan, but for the moment, she had no answer. Doom raised a hand to cut her off. "No more words. I will judge this. The decision rests with me." Sophia bowed, but did not leave. She kept glaring at Victor. He would not meet the central law officer's eyes. Instead, he turned away and looked out through the viewport at the starfield beyond. Doom weighed the choices. The conquest had to be fast, preferably within 6 months. He could not remain trapped in a different time flow for long. Prolonged displacement would limit his ability to respond and force him to keep constant watch for chaos. Chaos was their primary enemy. The gods were continually seeding disorder, and their long silence now hinted at a larger, more dangerous plot. The fleet had to move, and move quickly. The Heranian had made its intentions clear before capture, issuing the severest warning and ordering its kin to conserve their strength. Now crowded into a cluster of black holes, the Heranians were likely plotting an escape to preserve their species' spark. Victor's plan was highly feasible, even if it demanded that he sacrifice some of his own credibility. Doom was still lost in thought when someone on the bridge made an unexpected move. The tall obelisk, clad in black armor, spear in hand, boots thudding, strode to the central console and summoned a hologram. A clear emblematic figure of the military alliance flickered into being. "They've been fighting for 1,000 years, Obelisk said in a deep voice. "They should be the ones negotiating peace. We remain outsiders, a third-party witness." He spoke concisely, then fell back to a shadowed corner of the bridge and stood silently. Everyone else present was more than capable. A single hint was all it took for them to understand. What Obelisk was proposing was straightforward. Let the military alliance negotiate with Heranian, with the First Fleet acting only as a neutral witness. A ceasefire between 2 belligerents does not automatically extend to a third party. That semantic loophole was precisely the point. "Highly feasible," Sophia said, her eyes flickering with streams of data as she ran the calculations on the plan's viability. She gave the plan her full backing. Once the human exchange was complete, tearing up the treaty afterward would do no lasting damage to the master's reputation. Even if it was a little self-deceptive, she would support it. The other officers on the bridge mulled it over, ran the numbers, and then nodded. The scheme was far from impractical. A few of them glanced at the taciturn warrior who had proposed it. There was something quietly tender behind his imposing exterior that they had not noticed before. "Have the delegation contact the military alliance representative and get his opinion," Doom ordered, turning his son's idea into action. "And send the exchanged prisoners as messengers. They know our strength and will make the point for us. The fleet must be ready for battle," he added. "The first condition for peace talks is having enough force to make the Huronians sit at the negotiating table." With that command, the fleet went immediately into preparation for the next operation, an assault into the Huronians' lair. The ruse of a false peace moved forward quickly. When the military alliance heard the plan, they offered no hesitation and joined in eagerly. They were profoundly grateful, thanking Nur for his mercy that might finally let their ancestors and kin return home. The military alliance added a reminder of the stakes. If the plundered population was restored, 17 worlds would submit to the Nor world's rule. Even so, they said, if the rescue failed, they would still try to negotiate peace. Man proposes, God disposes. They urged the foreign rescuers not to shoulder too much of the psychological burden. The Huronian commander was even more effusive. It burst into joy and volunteered to act as a messenger to persuade its people, eagerly awaiting the outcome. It had long since lost hope, convinced it would die in the human world, burned at the stake for the sins it believed were unforgivable. Now, a sudden glimmer of hope had appeared in its dark future. The commander wept with gratitude and praised the mercy of fate. Any lingering suspicion of hidden schemes was swept away by that overwhelming joy, and it subconsciously ignored the danger ahead. Doom, the commander, understood perfectly the imbalance in strength between humans and his own kind. The humans could hold out for a while, but in the end, they would be crushed. That made the scheduled peace talks a rare opportunity, a chance to claim what the commander most wanted, the humans' warp drive. With that engine, his species could finally slip past the natural black hole barrier that hemmed them in and reach the stars. It was the kind of gamble a desperate people take, aware of the trap ahead, yet unable to resist the lure of escape. Doom turned to the stone man. "Victor, make the preparations," he ordered. "Prepare some small gifts." Victor understood immediately what small gifts meant. They were not presents but weapons built to erase the Huronian threat. "Understood," he replied, bowed, and left, relieved to step out from under the Central Law's sharp scrutiny. The initial movements were brisk and efficient. The military alliance representative was escorted aboard the Royal Majesty. The rest of the fleet detached a rendezvous ship and then slipped into warp. The Huronian homeworld lay buried deep in the star cemetery, tucked into a place where even light had trouble escaping, an island of darkness the commander was determined to breach. "Elder William, please, try not to be so agitated." Doom met the military alliance's envoy in the reception room and with an almost gentle courtesy indicated a seat. "Please sit." William stood there in his uniform, visibly shaken. He hesitated to take the offered chair. Every thing in the room was too pristine, too magnificent. He had only ever heard stories of ships like this, legendary, awe-inspiring vessels that once carried his ancestors through the void. The military alliance had ships of its own, but few of them were large, and most of those steel giants had lain dormant for years. The smaller craft kept to the fringes of conflict, hiding in the void so they could evacuate humanity when the need was greatest. This ship beneath his feet felt like a dream, far more advanced than anything he had known, and across the long table sat its owner, a figure who seemed to radiate light like a god. William, now past 50 and tempered by hardship, told himself not to show his bewilderment. Even so, when that luminous figure spoke and offered him a seat, William did not simply sit. Out of respect, he lowered himself to his knees. "I pay my respects to you, Lord from afar," he said. As he sank to his knees, his legs buckled for a moment. A large hand came down to steady him. The giant looming before him made the world tilt. Even on the Huronian battlefield, William had never felt so unnerved. He bowed so low, it looked like he might kneel, but Doom stopped him. "Old soldier, relax," Doom said, hauling him upright with a reassuring smile. "Like this, you won't be able to shoulder the plan." At the word plan, the smile vanished from William's face. He clamped his jaw, a hard light flaring in his eyes as reverence and awe snapped into something colder. "I will complete the mission," he said, voice steady and fierce. "For 1,000 years we have waited for vengeance." Satisfied that William had regained his composure, Doom sat back down. "This is the plan we propose." He tapped the table, and a schematics-like hologram slid toward the old soldier. William's face grew sober, his mouth dry. He licked his lips and focused intently on the images hovering in the air. The plan was simple, and left no margin for error. A summit would be staged here to arrange peace talks between humans and the Heranians. Once the human contingent had been exchanged, the fleet would move in and destroy the Heranian world, wiping the Heranians from existence. "I have no objections," the officer said. "I will carry out your orders completely." Chapter 162, Pressing Forward. The First Fleet slipped out of the warp and back into the real universe, emerging into a strange, oppressive light. Doom raised his hand and clenched his fist and felt it, a viscous resistance, as if time itself had thickened into something tangible. Through the viewport there was no sparkling starfield. Starlight could not escape the gravity well. A colossal accretion disk hung in the void like a ravenous tongue, swallowing every scrap of light and heat. Gravity seemed to give time form. At the disk's distant edge, it granulated into grains like sand, while at the nearest edge, it stretched into taut, linear strands. Doom barely had a moment to take it in before the Royal Majesty shifted. The warp bubble around the ship collapsed, and ordinary physics reasserted themselves. The black hole's pull seized the vessel. Under that force, the ships of the First Fleet began to drift together, sliding down and to the right. "Stabilizing the battleship," a cold, mechanical voice announced as Gates hovered in the air, his mechanical tentacles whirring. He ran multi-threaded routines, spooling auxiliary engines and quickly arresting the ship's drift. "Recalculating gravitational model," Sophia's calm voice echoed through the command deck before she appeared. "Injecting corrections into the automatic control system." The fleet's Iron Man units locked on and held the hull steady, while the data core streamed updated gravity vectors, correcting the battleship's attitude. "Lord, we need to withdraw now. The battleship's engine output is spiking," Gates warned, and the hologram shifted to show plasma belching from the hull. Even without Gates' alert, the left viewport already showed the neighboring battleship's lateral thrusters firing in bursts, jets of plasma pushing to counter the displacement. "Lock coordinates. Display our real-time position on the map," someone ordered. The holographic map reconfigured into a star chart of the black hole region, the fleet's current location pinpointed against the warped gravitational field. The map of the black hole cluster had been painstakingly reconstructed by interrogation teams and cross-checked again and again, once even by using psychic devices to pull memories from captured aliens. In a region this deadly, a single miscalculation in coordinates could send an entire fleet tumbling into an event horizon. "Astronomical telescope has found the target. Displaying on the holographic map," came the report. Sightings streamed in as the fleet's instruments locked on to the alien stronghold. 3 vast agglomerations of steel and chitin hung in the void, their surfaces mottled with artificial light, each one roughly the size of Terra. A ring of ships in every conceivable size prowled and hovered around those artificial worlds, a visible guard around the alien home. "Full speed ahead. Sink their battleships," Doom ordered. He leaned back on his command throne, watching the projected images with a growing chill in his gaze. As he had expected, hundreds of enemy warships were already massing around the constructs. The first phase of the plan was clear: demonstrate overwhelming force and drive the aliens to the negotiating table. The First Fleet snapped into combat formation. Engines spooled to maximum. The armada surged forward in a full-throttle sprint toward the alien cluster. The fleet plunged into the alien defense perimeter, cutting through it like a knife through flesh. All the capital ships opened fire at once, sending concentrated lances of light toward the enemy battleships. The Heranians hastily formed battle lines and advanced on the First Fleet, repeatedly unleashing gravity weapons designed to scramble and collapse the human formation. The trick worked once, but not twice. After the initial contact, the First Fleet had already learned the Heranians' tactics. Heranian warcraft and doctrine were overwhelmingly dependent on gravity technology, Their offensive and defensive systems were built around a single, predictable paradigm. Lacking true warp drives, they relied on superluminal engines for travel and had met few other civilizations, so their technological evolution had been slow and narrow. Their first real engagement after emerging from the black hole cluster had been with the human world. Humans had given stubborn resistance and even held them up at the Star Cemetery exit, but the Heranians' raw power eventually crushed the remnants. That ease of victory bred complacency. Like the sand lizard before them, the Heranians had fallen into a developmental trap. Without strong external rivals to force innovation, their technology had stagnated. Their environment had narrowed their imagination. Growing up in the Star Cemetery, they had assumed the universe was nothing but black holes, no shining, thriving star clusters to speak of. Before they ever met humans, they were convinced they were the only life that would ever be, a solitary, fated race. Then they met humans, and everything changed. The two sides went to war in the dead heart of deep space, and that void, which had known only silence, welcomed a long-delayed kind of prosperity. The battle itself was astonishing. Bright, searing lances of light cut through the darkness, but their paths were anything but straight. Macro-cannon shells, tugged wildly by gravity wells, swung in grotesque arcs. Their trajectories betrayed by nearby masses, they twisted and looped like thrown stones caught in a whirlpool. Yet even when they were bent and derailed, some other law took over, an inevitable hit causality, a targeting logic so complete that it wove those errant flights into winding, unavoidable paths. The heavy torpedoes behaved stranger still. They traveled the slowest, their thrusts sapped almost immediately by gravitational pull, so that they seemed to stall and hover in the void. Then, in a display that felt less like physics and more like sorcery, the torpedoes were peeled out of the real universe as if they were blocks from a game board and placed where they needed to be, an instant before detonation. Within range, a strike was guaranteed. It was the legacy of the Golden Age. Weapons that, once fired, effectively defied the ordinary laws of space. To watch them in action was to see technology make inevitability itself. The sight was beautiful, and it was terrifying. Causality technology was extraordinary, not ordinary engineering, but a way to alter the universe's underlying logic. By violating the sanctity of natural law, causality had become humanity's uncompromising doctrine, an absolute will beyond question. At the edge of the black hole, something worse than its inescapable pull occurred. Heranian battleships were hammered without mercy. Their once smooth hulls became pitted and scarred under successive barrages. The Heranians discovered a single, horrifying fact. Human gunnery was flawless. Shots landed with 100% accuracy. Heranian vessels kept breaking apart and tumbling into the black hole, torn down to their most fundamental constituents. To doom the mutual slaughter of ships felt sluggish. On the vast cosmic scale, void battleships were like insects, and his instincts as a Primarch urged rapid, decisive action. He forced those instincts into check, forcing himself to match the slow tactical rhythm of fleet combat, and simply wait for the naval engagement to resolve. Even though the battle unfolded exactly as his simulations had predicted, he still had to endure the wait. An anxiety that, with time, smoothed into a calm, almost meditative serenity. The void hung with tracer fire, and the First Fleet's overwhelming guns had the alien armada on the ropes. "Lord, incoming signal," Gates announced in its mechanical monotone. "Origin, Horanian." Doom's face cut cold. He nodded to the Iron Man to patch it through. A hologram flickered into being, a slug-like Horanian, its gelatinous form sagging. The bioluminescent energy glands along its body pulsed slowly, lending it a defeated, drooping look. Horanian physiognomy was oddly uniform. Individuals were nearly indistinguishable. Human eyes had trouble telling one from another. "Humans," the creature rasped, its voice wet and sibilant with slime. "My race admits defeat. We are willing to negotiate." "Negotiate?" Doom's voice was flat, almost incredulous. "There has never been negotiation, only racial extermination." He kept his features impassive, but the cruelty was a performance. His true aim was to force terms, not to annihilate. Negotiation could not be revealed yet. First he would bear down, leave no quarter, then, when they were broken, relent just enough to make them beg for mercy. "Even one as humble as I am can see that you are a great being." The Heranian's tone dropped even lower as it bowed deeper. Species and cultures might differ, but the instinct to show submission, the low, surrendering posture, was written into the genes of every life form. The alien pleaded, "In your great radiance, there should be no stain of racial extermination. We are responsible for the children of the abyss. They have offended humans, and we are willing to accept punishment." The Heranian's offer was solemn, an attempt at appeasement. "No, no, no!" Doom shook his head, his face hard and unforgiving. "I love humanity with all my heart, yet your race plunders humans without restraint. There must be consequences." His words rang grand and righteous, so much so that they felt more like a performance, a public display of devotion to humanity rather than a private ruling. "Heranian will never surrender." The alien snapped, anger and resolve breaking through its earlier submissiveness. "Lord, please wait a moment." As the negotiations threatened to collapse, an elderly man rushed onto the bridge, panic written across his face. "Please forgive my intrusion," William said to Doom, his voice anxious and undignified. "My lord, please, allow me to speak." Doom frowned, clearly displeased, but after a long moment he raised a hand. "Speak." "Thank you." William's face lit up. He turned to the Heranian envoy. "The military alliance is willing to negotiate, but on one condition." "What condition?" The Heranian craned its neck, eager for the answer. William's jaw clenched and his old face tightened with grief and rage. "You abominable aliens," he said through his teeth, "must release the humans you've taken." The Heranian faltered. The frill along its abdomen fluttered in obvious indecision. Intelligent creatures were not fools. Of course the aliens understood what the humans feared most, the 2 billion prisoners in their custody. With those hostages in hand, humanity would be reluctant to strike, giving the aliens room to maneuver. If the captives were returned, however, the humans would lose their last hesitation. "You have 3 days to decide." When the delegation hesitated, Doom pushed again. His face was expressionless, his voice calm but absolute. "After 3 days, we will strike." It wasn't an idle threat. He meant it. Regardless of human casualties among the prisoners, he would launch the attack and utterly destroy their race. "Lord," William's old voice pleaded from near the throne, but Doom cut him off with a raised hand. His eyes flashed with killing intent. "Old man, you've already given them a chance." "We will consider it," the Heranian quickly interjected. It needed time to consult the authorities of its people. 3 days. The aliens had learned humanity's time standard from the holographic display. Chapter 163, The Predicament and the Gamble. Heranian had few options. The pressure from the humans pressed on them like a rising tide, inching the Xenos ever closer to the abyss. Then, at the most critical moment, someone tossed a rope, the last slender chance of escape. Would Heranian take it? Like a drowning person clutching a piece of driftwood, panic and instinct warred inside them. No matter how fearful, they would not willingly let go. They would reach and scramble for anything within reach, however flimsy. Inside the Xenos Council, the debate raged. Voices rose and clashed as the delegates split and votes were cast. The opposition argued forcefully that the human captives could not be trusted. They pointed to history. Humans had repeatedly deceived their captors, had attempted uprisings, and had even bribed Heranians to win influence within the mining camps. Some had organized armed gangs and other clandestine forces. Cunning flowed through them like blood, the opposition said. They would use any means necessary to survive. That view was grim, but practical. Returning the humans, the dissenters insisted, would be a risk the Heranian people could not afford. These pitiable slaves had, by circumstance, become the lifeline of the race, a fragile hope that now demanded a firm grip. Even if we struck first, one counselor argued, 2 billion humans would die. Their annihilation would lay bare humanity's helplessness, an utter humiliation for their species. The chamber erupted into renewed debate, but everything went still when a voice cut through. But what if, fellow races? The simple question had an almost surgical effect. Heranian delegates fell silent. That 3-word phrase, "what if," was the softest, most dangerous thing a reasoning species could hear, the chink in certainty where hope slips in. Intelligent beings, the elders said, accepted death calmly when faced with a genuine dead end. They made noble sacrifices to prove their courage. But a dead end this was not. A crack of light had appeared in the darkness, and reaching for it might make the future attainable again. The hardliners' grim warnings were steadily overwhelmed by the swelling optimism of the peace faction. What had begun as a debate about survival turned into a debate about whether to gamble for peace. No argument the Hawks offered could blunt that fragile, irresistible what if. The person who finally tilted the balance was the commander of the raiding fleet, the very commander the humans had released as a gesture of sincerity. He stood at the center of the council, tall and broad-chested, reveling in the attention. When he spoke, he did not need rhetoric. He told what he had seen with his own eyes and heard with his own ears. He described human resilience and, above all, their technology, the warp engine. His testimony painted a picture of capabilities the council had not expected, and his words found the one place every cautious mind feared, a future not yet written. That was enough. The murmurs of doubt turned into applause from the peace faction, and the hardliners found themselves arguing against a possibility none of them could prove false. The what-if had done its work. When the warp engine appeared on the council screens, the Heranian council exploded into murmurs. High-ranking councilors leaned toward one another, whispering so rapidly the chamber seemed to hum. The Heranian people had always been stunted by one immutable fact. They could not escape the ring of black hole clusters that cocooned their territory. That cosmic barrier had been a cradle and a shield, nurturing them, protecting them from outside attack, but also serving as an inescapable prison. A warp engine changed that calculus entirely. With that technology, what corner of the galaxy would be beyond their reach? Opportunity and danger collided in the minds of the counselors. For now, they decided they would feign peace. They would submit to the humans, open communications, learn, and when the moment came, steal the warp technology and run. Even the most stubborn opponents found themselves wavering. The announcement was a shock so profound it left the council reeling. In the end, the vote was nearly unanimous. The council decided to hand the human captives back in exchange for continued peace. The Heranian race was gambling everything on a single, fragile wager, placing their collective future on a bet called trust at the high-stakes table between annihilation and survival. For the hope of unbounded expansion, they staked everything on the slim possibility of what if. "Sir," the envoy said through the comms, "we are willing to return the humans in exchange for peace talks." On the transmission, the Heranian representative lowered its body until it nearly touched the floor of the projection. Its slime glands quivered, exuding a glossy mucus in an obvious display of obsequiousness. Doom's eyes narrowed as he studied the alien. He spoke slowly, suspicion in his voice. "Are you plotting against us?" A sting ran across the Heranian's skin. The gaze of that imposing human cut through the digital link like a blade. It trembled with fear and deference, terrified that any misstep might anger the human commander and doom its entire species. "We will immediately offer our sincerity," it transmitted, voice quivering. As the Heranian finished, the augur array registered approval. The artificial world's shields and gravity generators began to power down. "Sir, this is our people's sincerity," the Heranian added, barely daring to breathe. It waited in silence, saying little, heart-pounding with humiliation and dread. Their world lay exposed and helpless. A few volleys from the human fleet's shoulder cannons could erase the Heranian civilization. Lowering shields and gravity fields was their test, a desperate gamble to show trust before any larger concession. Doom sighed, regret softening his features. "I can't refuse an elder's plea," he murmured. Then, aloud and decisive, "Xenos, prepare for peace talks. Do not make any sudden moves. My fleet can destroy you at any moment." Doom's eyes narrowed to knife-sharp slits as he warned the Heranian before conceding to peace talks. "We will show greater sincerity later," the slug added, its energy glands flickering with agitation. The humans had been blunt and trustworthy. This race had passed the most dangerous first test. "I will go make preparations." It slid back slowly, dragging its bulk away. That human sigh a moment ago, Doom thought, meant there was no real desire for war. They had to hurry. The Xenos must not be caught off guard by the human standing before them, or give him any pretext to strike. The holographic image dissolved, and Doom smiled. The plan was nearly complete. The artificial world beneath the bridge deck had been left defenseless. a deliberate temptation for the fleet. The Xenos' gambit was crude and obvious, born of a shallow culture that had no maxim like, if you want to take, first give. Between the fleet's pressure, the military alliance's demands, and the carefully planted bait, everything was falling into place, link by link. Once the human captives were evacuated, Heranian's destruction would be inevitable. For 10,000 years, humanity had sailed the star seas, and now they were giving the fledgling Xeno races a blunt lesson. Between species, it's kill or be killed. The price humans were asking for wasn't subtle, the extinction of the Heranians. To prove they were earnest, a Harani envoy boarded a cruiser to negotiate directly with Old Sergeant William. Sophia had insisted the Heranian delegation not come aboard the Royal Majesty. Too many people were coming and going during the talks. The constant traffic made the flagship vulnerable to a terrorist attack. After several rounds of discussion, they compromised. The final meeting would be held on a cruiser, neutral ground that would serve as the venue for both sides' peace talks. Doom watched it all through a holographic feed. The negotiation was a tight, professional affair, verbal sparring at the table, clause-by-clause haggling, and repeat compromises as political concerns collided with military demands. Old Sergeant William was impressively implacable. The military alliance treated every line as if it mattered. Even if some of the performance was theater, they committed to it fully, playing their parts so convincingly that the Heranians slowly let down their guard. The Xenos were completely absorbed in the negotiations. Their conversations had shifted from debates about racial survival to calculating how best to use the humans as leverage for power. One faction demanded exorbitant terms, the other haggled mercilessly. After a month of bargaining, and with the First Fleet pressuring them from outside, the delegations finally reached agreement. Doom felt the urgency keenly. Time beyond the Star Cemetery seemed to be slipping away, and the interminable negotiations had to end. Through his psychic senses, he perceived the Destroyer Warriors' soul fluctuations accelerating, more than 10 times their normal rate. He skimmed the treaty Heranian had painstakingly secured. On the surface, it looked legitimate, and Doom wouldn't waste psychic energy probing for subtle traps. Whatever hidden value it might have, he thought, would be squandered soon enough. As a witness, Doom signed the end of the agreement. The 3 representatives present were satisfied and erupted into cheers in the meeting room. The return of the humans had officially begun. Once arrogant toward their captives, the Heranian now escorted the humans out with surprising courtesy, bowing and bidding them farewell as the refugees prepared to leave. The change in the Heranians' demeanor, from haughty to humble, left many of the human evacuees oddly unaccustomed. For 3 months, 2 billion people streamed onto shuttles and transports, flowing off the Xenos world through the black hole cluster and toward the human world. Battleship decks were packed, transports ran continuously, moving people back and forth in an immense, grinding exodus. To pass the long hours between runs, Doom used the Royal Majesty's arena to drill the Primaris progeny and the Night Watch in advanced combat techniques. On the training decks, multi-branch cooperation exercises were held, and the results were impressive. Superhumans and ordinary mortals began to close the gaps in tactics and understanding, learning to operate as a single, more effective force. Sir, in 3 minutes, the last batch of humans will leave the Xenos world, Gates reported with his usual precision. After 5 months of preparations and shuttle rotations, the fleet was finally ready to depart for home. You've done well, Doom said simply. Gates, cold, clinical, and ruthlessly efficient by nature, acknowledged without fanfare. He was logical to the core, but also unwaveringly loyal, the sort of man you could call an Iron Man. This is my duty. Gates bowed slightly. His 2 mechanical tentacles rose and slowly saluted. Doom returned the nod, then turned his attention to the stoneman artisan. Victor, how are your presents coming along? Guaranteed to be stunning, Victor said with a hearty chuckle. He summoned a holographic map that unfolded between them, the deployment patterns glowing in precise lines and points. Within 3 months, our stealth reconnaissance ships will have positioned a large number of extermination devices, enough to eliminate the Xenos. The hologram reflected in Doom's eyes as he studied the plan and gave a satisfied nod. The The reconnaissance ships had used their cloaking to place weapons, altered by the stone men, around every Horani facility. The devices were camouflaged and completely silent, holding station in orbit until they were triggered. "They will love my gifts," Victor added, his chubby face breaking into a pleased grin, his eyes nearly disappearing into slits. Chapter 164, Time Flies. The last humans filed into 3 cruisers. Doom ordered the rest of the fleet to fall back slowly, an obvious, deliberate retreat meant to lower the Horanian guard. In these final moments, avoiding any rash moves was essential. The plan to seize victory had to be carried out steadily and without surprise. As the cruiser's engines warmed, the Horanian population sighed with relief. The sword that had hung over them for so long seemed to be withdrawn at last. Humans, after all, were known to keep their treaties. A heavy burden lifted from the Horanian collective chest as they let themselves imagine peaceful days ahead, even dreaming about ways to acquire the warp drive in the near future. They had no idea the human fleet was quietly reconfiguring its weapon coordinates. When the last of their people were aboard and the warships' reactors throbbed to life, jubilation broke out among the Horanians. Some cheered openly at what they believed was the humans' departure. Doom watched the celebration on the holographic display, a cold smile in his eyes, ready for the spectacle Victor had promised. Victor opened a channel to the 3 cruisers and issued a simple command: "Send our farewell gift." Amid the Horanian cheers, the 3 cruisers climbed into high orbit, their engines spooling up and power levels rising. What looked like a peaceful retreat was about to become something very different. Horanian glanced left and right, looking to its kin. The human fleet's movements didn't look like a routine departure. They looked panicked, as if fleeing some unspeakable horror. Victor sighed. The lamentable elegy is coming down on their world. A species born from the shadow of a black hole, he thought, could only be undone beneath one. Doom's eyes brightened with curiosity. He had heard of the lamentable elegy, the extinction weapon the Nur kept on standby in their darkest hours, a final device meant to take both sides down together. The name carried weight. Today he would see what that terror really meant. 3 cyclone torpedoes launched from the cruiser's underbellies, streaking straight for the aliens' artificial planet. By the time Horanian reacted, cursing the humans' treachery and denouncing their betrayal, it was already too late. There was no gravitational deflection, no shield to stop them. The cyclone torpedoes tore through the atmosphere, trailing tongues of fire as they slammed into the surface and punched into the world below. The cyclone torpedoes streaked toward the artificial world's core, each warhead packed with a mechanical sarcophagus designed to amplify the blast. On the bridge, the feed from the alien flagship filled the main screen. A massive slug-like figure coiled into view, fury distorting its features. "Humans, faithless species, you betrayed the Alliance," it bellowed. "You have deceived the children of the Abyss." Horanian's voice rattled through the channel as it bent gravity to levitate a parchment covered in vows and a dozen signatures. It shoved the document forward like an accusation. "Look at your signatures. They are a stain of shame." On the opposite console, Doom seized the moment. He produced his own copy of the Alliance Treaty and tapped a specific clause with a slow, cold finger. "This contract was signed between you and the military alliance. I was a witness," he said. "Nowhere does it say a witness may not wage war against you." The words landed like a blow. Doom's expression hardened. With a gesture meant for the cameras as much as for the slug, he tore the treaty in half and let the pieces flutter away. "Aliens who poison humanity for 1,000 years cannot expect mercy," he snapped. "They will be purged." Horanian's shriek cut the comms. "Despicable! Shameless!" it howled, stunned speech giving way to rage. The levitated parchment trembled and then fell. In that charged silence, the alien realized it had been outplayed, its people's faith weaponized against them by a single legalistic loophole. The gamble had failed. Horanian had lost completely. Price of losing the gamble was extinction. When the lamentable elegy detonated, communications hiccuped and the Horanians vanished from the holographic feed. Doom snorted. Their naive hope had been their undoing. Their wishful thinking had squandered the last chance to resist. A low, buzzing hum rolled through the artificial world. The Horanians had evolved at the edge of a black hole. They were hypersensitive to shifts in gravity. Their instincts screamed that something was wrong. Gravity within the planet was climbing off the scale. The human device, buried at the planet's core, had birthed an artificial black hole. It was already too late to flee. Measurements spiked and warped. The Horanians poured out bioenergy, trying to twist and counter the rising gravity in a desperate final struggle. It was useless. The pull only intensified. Their gelatinous forms were crushed flat against the chitinous flooring, fluids pressing out and seeping over the panels, organs pushed and ruptured, spines buckling until the creatures tore apart in agonized silence. The tremors deepened. From orbit, the engineered world's continents began to fracture, ripping free layer by layer from the steel framework that held them together. Collapse. Disintegration. The Horanians, the children of the abyss, had never imagined that the force that birthed them would be the one to end them. The very gravity that had shaped their species turned against them. When the laws of nature rebelled, their ferocity and power became thousands of times more terrible than in any peaceful state. Matter was stretched, squeezed, and crushed. From the heart of each artificial world, an artificial black hole slowly unfurled. Like a greedy cosmic beast, it opened its void-like maw and swallowed the material world whole. Any stubborn survivors found their minds arrestingly altered, consciousness stalled and stretched into infinite filaments, individual selves drawn out to a thin, elongated edge around the abyss. They hung there, unknowable to themselves and unable to touch any reality. Magnificent. Doom could not help but clap. The sight was overwhelming, horrific and beautiful at once. Lamentable Elegy truly lived up to its name, an unrepeatable, irreversible elegy, as grand and terrible as any mournful epic. 3 black holes consumed 3 worlds. When the devouring finished, those worlds were gone, erased down to nothing. Nothing remained, not a ruin, not a mote of dust. When the 3 primary worlds vanished, the alien stations along the rim detonated. Covert drifting torpedoes finished off the last of the alien constructs. Leave 3 cruisers to patrol this void, Doom ordered. Make sure nothing slips through the net. Doom's cold rationality was awe-inspiring. He detached warships to sweep the area for survivors and left nothing to chance. He was neither indecisive nor sentimental. Once he decided a threat existed, he erased it without hesitation. When the cleanup was complete, the fleet dove back into the warp and left the black hole cluster behind. In years to come, outside human warlogs, few species would ever know that an intelligent race had once arisen on the edge of a black hole. The first fleet returned to normal space, emerging at the star system on the border of the star cemetery and re-entering ordinary time. At the moment of departure, old Sergeant William fell to his knees before Doom, raised a warrior's salute, and spoke with solemn intensity. "My lord, words cannot repay this debt. From this day forward, the military alliance pledges its allegiance to the Nor worlds." Doom knelt and helped the old sergeant to his feet. "Nur will help you rebuild your home," he said gently. "Keep to your duties and preserve your culture. The universe is vast. Nur needs warriors like you. I will not fail your expectations." William snapped a brisk salute, his aged face suddenly solemn. After their farewells, he left most of his men with the fleet and prepared to depart. Doom watched him go. He already had plans for the settlement. A war college would be founded here, turning the place into an ideal conscription ground for mortals. Once William had gone, Sophia interrupted with the thing she knew he worried about most. "My lord, we've been gone 6 years." Doom shook his head, helpless. The fleet had spent only 5 months wiping out the alien threat with 0 casualties, but when they returned to normal time flow, 6 years had slipped by. Sophia had anticipated his need for information. "Your important messages," she added, and presented the results. She had pulled 6 years' worth of reports from the rendezvous ships, filtered and summarized them into a concise briefing. "Thank you, Sophia," Doom said. Her work had been flawless. "I dare not claim credit," Sophia said, though she straightened slightly, betraying how proud she was. Doom let a knowing smile cross his handsome face as he began to go over 6 years' worth of dispatches. The reports painted a steady, encouraging picture for Nur. Most of the messages were routine updates, nothing catastrophic. Li Tang's second fleet had performed spectacularly. His epithet, Tangkan, had become famous throughout the Halo stars. He led the fleet across controlled space, conquering world after world and steadily expanding the borders of the Norworlds. Harlan's third fleet surprised Doom the most. The man known as the champion swordsman had abandoned his old aggressive tactics and adopted a far more deliberate, methodical approach. With each conquest, he purged the ancient regime, replacing the old ruling classes with younger leaders to administer the new worlds. Rather than pushing deep into unfamiliar space, he cruised along the periphery of Nur's core, scouring the fringes for lost worlds and consolidating control to ensure the stability of their territories. Senna, commander of the Fourth Fleet, had a single clear objective: operate in the space between the core-controlled territories and the outer sphere of influence. True to his reputation as the racing master, he favored speed and reconnaissance, sending out numerous scout flotillas to locate the star cluster's transport hubs. The worlds he took were chosen for a reason. They were strategically placed, resource-rich, and densely populated. Most important of all, Senna had unearthed and secured more STC templates than either of the other two fleets. Doom nodded as he reviewed the reports. The three eagerly watched fleet commanders had each shown their own distinct approach. Li Tang had been unstoppable, Harlan advanced with steady, methodical progress, and Senna focused on carefully planned strategic conquests. Their methods differed, but they all agreed on one principle: never be greedy or reckless. First, secure the territories already under control to guarantee stability. Conquest was not an end in itself, but the start of something else. Victories only mattered if their gains were properly realized. Otherwise, conquest was wasted. 165, Ferris Malice. The first Manus report came in. Harlan and Senna, not a surprise to Doom that they'd pulled it off. The pleasantest surprise, though, was Li Tang, the Primarch's eldest son. He thought like the Night Watch. He had studied Nur culture thoroughly and put that knowledge to use in the field. Doom read the files and let out a quiet sigh. "Looks like I'm the slowpoke here," he said to himself with a wry, self-deprecating smile. He shook his head but wasn't truly disheartened. "You were pressed for time, yet your results are just as impressive," Sophia said, performing a small curtsy and lifting her skirts with the composed grace of a lady. It was an extraordinary achievement. The fleet lost no personnel and only sustained minimal material damage, and yet it wiped out a species with enormous potential. Iron Man Gates chimed in, its disc-shaped emitter throwing up a holographic readout. Based on the battle damage ratios, this operation qualifies as highly efficient. Doom said nothing, only smiling faintly at the AI's earnest attempts to paper over the gap in their progress. Then he opened the message from Terra. The Emperor had sent 2 astropathic summons, urging him back to the Imperium. 3 of his brothers had already returned to the Lion Throne World, and the Emperor wished him to join them. "Target, Terra. Set sail," came the order. The fleet's engines thudded awake, driving the ships toward Mandeville Point and the rift that marked the exit from real space. "Target, Terra. Warp lane lock imminent," came Francisca's thin, ethereal announcement. She had spent most of the voyage confined to a stasis pod, rarely stirring. The voice was more an echo through the ship's systems than a living conversation. As that illusory tone faded, the deep-voiced ship choir swelled, an accompaniment to the navigators as they threaded the ship into the warp lane. The navigators themselves were effectively blind. Repeated use of psychic sight had taken their physical vision long ago. That loss did not impair their third sight, what passed for a navigator's true perception, but it made for a fragile dependence on ritual and chorus. Perhaps for that reason Francisca avoided leaving her pod unless she mustered the strength. Each exposure to raw warp power brought a painful backlash. At the same instant, the Gellar field came online, folding a bubble of reality around the hull to prevent the warp from eating away the ship. Doom's presence, whether by name or by blessing, dampened other warp phenomena and drove off lingering corruption. With those safeguards in place, the passage looked to be smooth. Protocol required it. The fleet's standard procedures were absolute. Discipline preserved lives, complacency courted disaster. So when the ship slipped into the warp, all viewports were sealed, and the outside world was replaced by holographic projections. The battle barge Doom entered the warp, bound for Terra. Far beneath the Imperial Palace, in the Palace Forge, a tall man stood at an anvil. He was imposing, a square, dignified face framed by a neat buzz cut, eyes like twin shards of steel. He wore a heavy leather apron, and his face was streaked with carbon ash. He looked both stern and unkempt, austere and fierce. He hammered relentlessly. His fists, not flesh but iron, a dull silver gray that seemed to glow from within, moved with effortless precision. The metal hands flexed and struck as if they contained living tendons. When he struck the iron blank, the veins and vessels beneath the metal swelled and trembled as though still alive. Each blow threw up sparks that betrayed his nature. Ferrus Manus, the Emperor's son, Primarch of the 10th Legion, the Stormwalkers. He hammered on, shaping weapon and destiny in the heat and smoke of the forge. Ferrus Manus came down on the edge of the Halo stars, onto Medusa, the 4th planet of the Medusa system. His amniotic pod tore free from the warp and struck with terrible force, blasting through a mountain crusted with black snow. He crawled out of the cracked shell into the fang, bitter air, and watched a silver-white dragon beat away from the scar he had made. The connection was immediate. His fall had broken whatever seal held the creature. He swore, quietly and without ceremony, that he would one day track and destroy that dragon to atone for his mistake. Reason asserted itself next. Ferrus turned to the ruined pod. Its outer hull was covered in strange runes, and stamped on the lower front face was a single mark, the Roman numeral X. He understood at once that he was not unique. There were at least 9 others like him. He scanned the bleak landscape and found no sign of them, only black snow underfoot and distant, rust-streaked mountains. When he looked up, his sight, honed beyond human limits, pierced the low cloud and found a vast ring of steel suspended above the world. The Primarch's mind took everything in at once. He had landed in a dying world. After burying his amniotic pod, he walked Medusa, testing the ground beneath his feet and learning the planet by touch and sight. When he was thirsty, he ate the black snow. When he was hungry, he gnawed at scrap metal and soil. A Primarch's metabolism could digest almost any material the world offered. He soon encountered creatures not unlike himself, small, fragile things who called themselves humans. His growth was astonishing. In a matter of years, the infant he resembled at arrival became a broad-shouldered man, more than 4 meters tall. Ferrus did not seek out the humans. He kept to the shadows, watching them closely. They lived amid the ruins of a brighter age, driving hulking land machines across the wastes as nomads, and surviving by scavenging. True scientific theory had been lost. Knowledge of technology had atrophied into crafts and traditions passed down by rote. Quietly, Ferrus taught himself the principles of those broken machines and the structures that powered them, but he kept that understanding to himself. He did not hide it out of greed. The Primarch simply believed the hour to give it was not yet come. On Medusa, technology was a blade that had to be handled with care. Sharing knowledge carelessly could spark a renaissance, and just as easily ignite violent rivalries among the nomadic tribes. Ferrus, the Primarch, understood that well. He kept technological advances tightly controlled and refused to hand them out until he had firm authority to manage their consequences. Cautious to the point of isolation, he rarely approached local humans until he judged the time right. He traveled alone for long stretches and made no effort to hide himself, but that only fed the rumors. Tribes traded stories of a cloaked giant who walked the wastes of Medusa as if searching for something lost. Some bands saw him as a threat and tried to surround him. They were routed without difficulty. The giant did not slaughter them. He spared the survivors, and their testimony turned him into legend. The tales grew wilder with each retelling. He was the star of calamity, the hunter, the giant of the end, the son of man, the god of resurrection. Wherever Ferrus went, new names followed, and the lore around him thickened into myth. He did not stop for fame. He kept walking across Medusa, patient and watchful, waiting for the right moment to begin reuniting humanity. What did he mean by the moment? Ferrus knew the answer in his bones. The silver dragon he had freed, an act he now regretted, had to be hunted down. He swore he would find it and atone for that mistake. At last the Primarch found its trail. He tracked the dragon to a lake of boiling lava and cornered it there. The two of them tore the landscape apart. Hills were smashed, boulders split, and their roars rolled like thunder across the plain. Nearby human tribes watched from a safe distance, too afraid to approach, waiting out the mythical clash between two monsters. Even after days and nights of relentless combat, Ferris, bolstered by the divine strength of a Primarch, did not tire. He felled the dragon again and again, but could not finish it. The beast's silver body flowed like molten metal, tough, elastic, and seemingly able to mend itself. Each time he struck, it reformed. Driven to desperation, Ferris looked across the seething lake. With a final iron resolve, he seized the exhausted dragon and forced it down into the lava. The creature flailed, its liquid metal hide beginning to boil under the infernal heat, but it could not break free of the Primarch's grip. After hours of stalemate, the silver dragon finally succumbed. A stream of silver-gray liquid metal separated from its body and crept up Ferris's arms. For a moment his reflex was to pull away, but he realized that withdrawing would render all his efforts meaningless. Gritting his teeth, he held his ground. When the dragon drowned in the scorching lava, Ferris drew his arms free. The molten metal had fused to his limbs, hardening into a new, unyielding skin. He strode out of the lava lake, and the gathered people fell to their knees in reverence, bestowing on him a name that fit the sight, Iron Hands. Sensing the moment was right, the Primarch accepted their loyalty and revealed his own name, Ferris Manus. From that day, he taught the tribes the secrets of technology, armed their warriors, and set about conquering the world of Medusa. A master tactician, Ferris planned every battle with cold precision. With his iron hands, he was unbeatable. He united the scattered nomads at breathtaking speed, forging them into 9 great tribes. Even after the 9 tribes were secure, Ferris did not settle. He moved across Medusa, periodically inspecting each tribe and keeping a watchful hand over the world he had remade. Ferris, the Primarch, fostered rivalry among the tribes. Their healthy competition drove rapid development and strengthened their fighting force. Then one day, a shaft of golden light fell from the sky. Ferris felt it in his bones, dropped whatever he was doing, and went straight to where the light had struck. Bathed in that light stood a figure of pure gold. Ferris was struck dumb. Words failed him as he tried to name the holiness of the presence before him. The figure rose like a beacon, its radiance washed over everything, and seemed to carry a solemn, redemptive song. It was more sacred than anything Ferris had ever imagined, the closest thing to perfection he could conceive. My senior sister has arrived. Should I call the Purple Court Phoenix Fugin or Fulgrim? Both names fit. The figure who came was none other than the master of mankind, traveling across the galaxy to the Medusa system in search of his lost son. Ferris Manus did not know the visitor's name, but something in him answered, an inexplicable pull, as if 2 souls were recognizing each other across a gulf. The master hovered above like a living sun. Ferris stood below, staring up at that brilliance. Without a word, Ferris swung his ironclad fist and charged. An instinct older than thought told him he must seize this chance. To stand against such a being might never come again. The master of mankind mirrored him, raising a golden hand to meet Ferris's blow. 2 titans met with a wordless, almost telepathic understanding. Though they had never met, they measured each other by strength. They greeted one another with a display of divine power. Their battle tore the land. Mountains crumbled, the earth roiled, and the clash went on without pause. For 3 days and 3 nights, Ferris and the master of mankind traded strike for strike in a contest of pure, overwhelming force. Ferris collapsed into the black snow, battered and gasping, and looked up at the golden figure looming above him. "Who are you?" he croaked. The Primarch's voice was deep and rough, a metallic resonance that seemed to come from the bones of his chest. The single question landed like a hammer. The golden figure advanced silently. His radiance felt sacred and all-encompassing. With every step, the light dimmed, and the dazzling silhouette resolved into the weathered face of a middle-aged man. Ferris stared, stunned. This was the face he'd always dreamed of for humanity, resilient and steady as a mountain. The man's eyes were as deep as a reflected galaxy, his nose a solid peak that seemed built to bear impossible weight. "I am the master of mankind," the man said simply. "That is what they call me." His Adam's apple bobbed, a contented sound escaped him, and his clear eyes shone with affection. He reached out toward Ferris, his expression warm and expectant. "But I am more than that now. I am a father. I have come to find my lost 10th son. A father? The master of mankind? The 10th son? At the sound of a single sentence, Ferris knew immediately the man before him was his father. The stoic, unsmiling face softened into a small smile, and Ferris reached out and took the man's arm. There was no need to test the truth of the words. The instant their great hands closed around one another, the certainty flooded him. This was the master of mankind, the emperor, the supreme ruler of the Imperium. Ferris embraced the master of mankind with a smile that was altogether human. He dropped to one knee and swore an oath of fealty in the Medusan tongue. The emperor, visibly pleased, helped his 10th son to his feet. Together they boarded the vessel called the Emperor's Dream and set course for Terra. Thus Ferris Manus, Gene Father of the 10th Legion, returned from Medusa to Terra to assume command of his Gene son's legion, the Stormwalkers. During his days on Terra, he drank deeply from imperial knowledge, absorbing laws, histories, and technologies with the clear, analytical mind of a Primarch and weighing everything he saw and heard. Ferris broke up the old legion and reshaped the Stormwalkers into 9 great companies, each aligned with one of Medusa's major tribes. He gave them a new name, the Iron Hands. To a Primarch, the pace of ordinary humans and even the Space Marines raised from them always seemed slow. With the Legion reorganized and the Emperor's gifted Gloriana refitted, there was nothing left to occupy him. Boredom drew Ferris to the forges. He descended to the Imperial Palace's underground smithies on Terra and tried to fill the emptiness inside him with work. At the anvils, his fists fell like a summer downpour. His silver-gray iron hands hammered without pause, and under that relentless motion, weapons took shape. Those same metal hands gave him not only devastating unarmed strength, but the ability to fashion high technology with nothing more than his grip and skill. Forge masters stood by, mouths open, as piece after piece came from the fire, blades and guns of a quality and brilliance they had never seen. These were not merely good weapons. They were the sort of arms mortal smiths might spend a lifetime trying and failing to make. Yet Ferris, the demigod son of the master of mankind, forged them with only his hands. The sight of such effortless mastery was extraordinary to all who watched. For a while, Ferris worked surrounded by mortal artisans who watched and learned from his extraordinary skill. The forge, once filled with the constant clamor of many hammers, now answered only to a single rhythm, one towering figure at the anvil. At that moment, another giant entered the workshop. Ferris paused, turned toward the entrance, and met the newcomer's gaze across the room. His thick brows drew together, a question flickering in his eyes. The arrival was ostentatious, a peacock among smiths. The mortal craftsmen fell to their knees as one. They did not know the man's name, but on Terra, only the master of mankind and his sons possessed such presence. The newcomer had long, silver-white hair, smooth as silk, spilling over his chest. His eyes were purple, giving him an aristocratic, luxurious air. His face was pale and flawless like white jade, unnaturally beautiful, arresting without a word. Tall and slender, he wore a sweeping purple robe embroidered with gold, the garment parted to reveal half of a muscular chest. He simply stood there, one hand on his hip, chin tilted at a practiced, haughty angle. The forge's doorway framed him like a portrait, and the figure within was naturally elegant and flawless. Ferris recognized the newcomer at once as the brother he had never met. He glanced at the peacock-bright robe the man wore, and a teasing curl at the corner of his mouth said, "This isn't the place for you. Don't let oil and soot ruin your finery." The newcomer returned the smile, and the whole foundry seemed to brighten with it. The laborers who caught sight of him went still, momentarily stunned. "Brother," he said, "I've come to have a weapon forged, for myself. I intend to join Father's great crusade." The towering figure was the master of mankind's 3rd son, the Gene Father of the 3rd Legion, Fulgrim. Those closer to him called him Fusion. He hailed from Chemos, a mineral world born of the dark age of technology, famed in older times for its wealth of ore and factories. Long ago, Chemos traded minerals for food with other worlds, but when the warp storms severed humanity's lanes, the exchanges stopped. The mines and foundries became useless, the stores ran dry, and the people of Chemos were driven to fight over scraps of food and water. The mineral world that had once been prosperous was now a wasteland of endless sand. Chemos's atmosphere swallowed what little life it had left. Its mines lay abandoned or choked with dust, and the people who remained scraped whatever they could from the ruined world. Against that sky, an amniotic pod cut a bright streak, falling toward the surface and catching the attention of a group of workers. They tracked its fiery trail to a flat, desolate plain and found, to their astonishment, a sphere of light coalescing in midair. It resolved into a perfect human infant, a small male, flawless in every detail, suspended for a moment as if the air itself had held him for them to see. The sight left them breathless. For a time, they simply stood and stared, mesmerized by the child's impossible perfection. But life on Chemos was brutal and relentlessly practical. Rations were meager, and one man, thinking only of survival, argued they could not afford to feed a child and suggested killing him. Another worker would not hear of it. To protect the infant, he struck his companion down and drove the rest back. They wrapped the child and carried him to their camp, where they named him Fulgrim, a name they gave with weight, a name of profound significance to them. Fulgrim grew with alarming speed. Under the care of those rough hands, he learned quickly, an intelligence and a magnetic charisma bloomed in him almost from the first. The workers, who had first rescued him out of necessity and argument, were soon won over by the boy. They gathered around him, drawn to his presence, and began to obey his words. He repaid their faith. The child they had saved became a leader, and he did not disappoint them. Using his extraordinary intellect, Fulgrim rebuilt Chemos's factories, dramatically increasing the production of daily necessities and relieving the famine that had long plagued its people. He introduced technologies that reshaped the barren world, making it progressively more hospitable to human life. Soon after, Fulgrim set out to bring Chemos under a single rule, determined to liberate its inhabitants completely. Though conquest and violence were instinctive to a Primarch, he rarely relied on force. Instead, he used what came most naturally to him, charisma. In every city-state he visited, he first distributed food to ease immediate hunger, then followed with speeches that stirred hope and loyalty. The people were spellbound by Fulgrim's apparent perfection, hungry for the future he painted, and eager to live under the guidance of such an extraordinary being. Because he shunned coercion, unification proceeded slowly, but deliberately. By abandoning the instinct for violence, the Primarch managed to conquer an entire world through sheer personal magnetism. From his first arrival to the moment he ruled, Chemos outright took 50 years. Throughout that long process, he championed peaceful conquest, resorting to force only on the rarest of occasions. To secure stable rule, ensure fairness, and bind the city-states together, Fulgrim entered into political marriages with every polity on Chemos, taking dozens of wives. Under his guidance, the people escaped famine. Suffering on the world was all but ended. Then an imperial fleet appeared in orbit, and dropships thundered down to the surface. The master of mankind had come to take his son home. The people of Chemos brought the master of mankind and his space marines before Fulgrim. At the first sight of him, Fulgrim knew. The figure that stood before him was his father, perfect, golden, and utterly compelling. The master of mankind, who could assume 1,000 faces to fit 1,000 needs, embodied Fulgrim's very idea of perfection. Without a word, he dropped to one knee, offering his personal sword with both hands and swearing fealty to his father. Fulgrim then led Chemos back into imperial allegiance. The emperor took his son to Terra and charged him with command of the 3rd Legion. Fulgrim felt the weight of his duty. To help spread the glory of the master of mankind across the galaxy, the emperor bestowed a name upon Fulgrim's force, the Emperor's Children. Deeply moved, the master of mankind granted them a special honor, permission to bear the imperial aquila upon their legionary armor. Chapter 167. Gifts Exchanged. When the Primarch returned, the Emperor's Children had been reduced to a fraction of their former strength. Only 200 battle brothers remained. After a devastating strike on the gene seed cultivation chambers on the moon, the 3rd Legion had been ravaged by the thing they called the wasting sickness. The gene plague ate away at their enhanced organs. Marines who once stood unbowed decayed in agonizing fits. The infection was a living terror. It could flare during implantation or erupt without warning on the battlefield. Its capriciousness a constant, gnawing dread. Countless great warriors did not fall gloriously in combat, but were stolen by that slow, corrosive death. With the gene father absent and no source of uncontaminated gene seed, the Legion teetered on the edge of disbandment. Fulgrim's return changed that. His presence brought hope. With him, new, pure gene seed could be cultivated, and the third might yet be saved. As the Legion entered a period of replenishment and recovery, Fulgrim made his way to the forge. There, amid heat and hammer, he would fashion a weapon for himself, a personal gift to mark the turning of their fortunes and to steel himself for what lay ahead. To meet his own exacting definition of perfection, the Primarch insisted on forging his own weapon. He had to make something worthy of himself, balanced, flawless, an extension of his taste for the exquisite. So he came to the forge. There, hunched over an anvil and smeared with coal dust, a disheveled giant hammered a blade. Iron fingers, artificial, massive, moved with a craftsman's surety. The bloodline bond that linked the Primarchs thrummed in Fulgrim's veins and told him, without doubt, who that giant was. Ferrus Manus. He stood for a long heartbeat, taking in the scene, the spray of sparks, the heat, the smell of oil and hot metal, and then stepped forward. Ferrus looked up. His voice was calm, measured, but threaded with a thin edge of contempt. "This is no place for you," he said. "Don't let oil and coal soil your splendor." Fulgrim's mouth curved into a flawless smile. He did not bristle. His tone was silk over steel. "My dear brother," he answered smoothly, "we are both sons of our father. My hands have known engine oil as well." There was something almost musical in the way he spoke, a cultivated charm that made even rebukes sound like compliments. He held himself perfectly, poised, immaculate, the hem of his coat untouched by soot, the pale fingers at his side clean and elegant. Ferrus's eyes drifted down to those hands, slender, fine-boned, the hands of a man who preferred the brush to the hammer, and he shook his head slowly. Not in surprise, not quite in anger, but with a patient, exhausted disapproval, as if the sight before him explained half a truth and denied the rest. Around them the forge roared on, sparks flaring against the night. The two brothers stood opposite one another, one all burnished grace and studied beauty, the other raw, iron-forged, and scorched by industry. Their words had been few, but each had already declared what they were. "Your fragile hands won't stand the heat," Ferrus said, raising his silver arm. His voice, deep and rough as a bellows, cut through the roar of the forge. "The flames will blister that delicate skin." They were two Primarchs, two sons of the Emperor, opposite in almost everything. Ferrus was blunt and unadorned. Fulgrim, elegant and splendid. Fulgrim only smiled, and the smile was warm enough to dull the warning. He stepped forward with a gait so graceful it could intoxicate. "Everyone, rise." He stopped at an anvil and inclined his head to the smiths around him. With a practiced motion, he drew his robe down, slung it across one shoulder, and hitched the purple fabric up at his waist. The motion exposed a sturdy chest, long, perfectly proportioned legs, and the powerful muscle beneath a flawless exterior. Fulgrim picked up the tongs, clamped a glowing iron billet, and set it on the anvil. "Interested in a competition?" he asked. The forge, light catching on his pale skin and wrapping him in flame, a phoenix rising from the embers. "Of course." Ferrus didn't hesitate to accept his brother's offer. He wiped the grime from his face with the back of his hand and stood ready. Fulgrim, poised and immaculate by the forge, was all the inspiration he needed. Ferrus set about making a weapon. Fulgrim watched him with a wry smile, shaking his head. Ferrus's crude, practical manner never changed. He wiped coal dust across his skin and only smeared it further, sweat and soot giving his face the look of someone painted in grease. For a moment Fulgrim simply admired the sight, then fell silent as Ferrus drew himself into the work, thinking through the weapon he would make. Not merely serviceable, but worthy of him. Clang! The hammer began to fall. Ferrus's strange silver-gray hands, metal plates fused to flesh, rose and struck the iron blank again and again. He worked with a terrible, concentrated seriousness, every blow shaping and refining. He became like a living hammer, so intent that nothing else existed but the metal and the heat. Fulgrim and Ferrus both reached for their power. Each used it in his own way. Fulgrim with a precise, almost artistic touch, Ferrus with raw, unyielding force married to technique, and slowly the weapon took form. Sparks flew, the rhythm of hammer and thought synchronized, and the two Primarchs, by very different methods, began to forge something worthy of legend. Ferris moved like a machine made of muscle and metal. His iron hands described perfect circles, each blow ringing true and sending sparks flying from the red-hot billet. Beside him, Fulgrim was all practiced grace, fingers sure, tools handled with the ease of an artist. His strikes were fewer but precise and beautiful. Every motion flowed into the next, as if he were composing music on the anvil. Around them, the other smiths fell silent and dropped to their knees. For a moment, the forge felt consecrated. Two demigods had turned the anvil into an arena. It was a sight the oldest among them would swear had not been seen in an age. Skill elevated beyond mortal craft into something almost holy, a place no ordinary smith could hope to reach in a lifetime. Sweat plastered Fulgrim's silver hair to his brow, but he seemed scarcely aware of it. He struck with absolute focus, and where his hammer met, iron lightning flashed above the anvil, a power that felt nurtured from storm and sky. The metal answered, drawing that electric will into itself. The weapon, taking shape under his hands, pulsed with an intent almost sentient. Ferris, by contrast, cradled the furnace. Heat wrapped around his iron fists as he hammered without pause, driving fire into the heart of the blank. His blows were raw and relentless, full of heat and passion. The weapon he coaxed from the metal burned with a fierce, living heat. When the flames leapt, the sound seemed to be a phoenix's cry, a radiance and hunger that matched the thunder at Fulgrim's forge. Two different divinities born from the same red-hot iron. Sweat beaded on Ferris's brow and ran down his arms, but he felt no fatigue, only the fierce excitement that comes when a powerful weapon is about to be born. He glanced up at his brother and, to his surprise, found Fulgrim's skill equal to his own. The weapon, glowing in the electric light, was every bit as formidable. As if answering some unspoken cue, Fulgrim looked up too. His purple eyes caught Ferris's face, and Ferris's dark eyes returned the gaze, reflecting his brother back with 1,000 unspoken words and the most sincere recognition. They exchanged a smile, the quiet, complete understanding of shared blood and purpose. When the sparks faded, the quenched weapons were lifted from the oil. Their radiance outshone the forge fires. Ferris held a longsword in one hand and turned it over, admiration in his eyes. The blade glowed with a golden light, as if it contained an unquenchable flame. It arced and flared like a fire phoenix poised to take flight. Fulgrim's weapon crackled with a storm, a warhammer wreathed in lightning, its pole faceted on four sides and sharply beveled, an embossed winged eagle set into its flank. Flame blade, furnace breaker. They named their weapons at the same time, exchanged a quick look, and then laughed together. Rich, easy laughter that needed no words. Though Ferris Manus's bearing was coarse and blunt, he had hammered out an exquisitely balanced longsword. Fulgrim, all elegance and flourish, had produced a brutal, uncompromising warhammer. Each weapon was a tribute to the other, a forged echo of the brother they saw in their hearts. "A magnificent blade," Fulgrim said, clicking his tongue in genuine admiration. "Your smithing is superb." Ferris just smiled and shrugged. With a casual sweep of the flame blade he had named, he cleaved a solid iron anvil cleanly in two. The cut face was as smooth and bright as a mirror. "Not just for show," he said. "Practical, too." Fulgrim nodded, a flush of pride on his face. Ferris's praise had been more than complimenting skill. By shaping a weapon in Fulgrim's image and proving its worth, he was saying that Fulgrim's beauty concealed real strength, not mere ornament. Ferris's gaze was locked on the warhammer in his brother's hand. The furnace breaker pleased him. Its bulk and balance spoke of a weapon made for breaking shields and skulls. Fulgrim tilted his head, a small, practiced smile of superiority touching his lips. "Of course," he said, never hiding the arrogance beneath his polish. "Only the most resilient warriors have the will and strength to wield it." The compliment was also a compliment to Ferris himself, an oblique tribute to the stubborn toughness that lay under his rough exterior. For a heartbeat, the two of them simply looked at one another, each taking the measure of the other with frank, brotherly appraisal. It showed on their faces, admiration, amusement, the private pride that passes between kin who know each other's worth. When their purple and black eyes met, the decision was unspoken but immediate. They walked toward one another with the easy gait of comrades who have shared countless campaigns. When they stood close, the smiles on their faces were almost boyish. "My brother, this weapon is worthy of you," Ferris said, his rugged features softening as he lifted the flame blade and offered it to Fulgrim. Fulgrim did not refuse. He took the flame blade from Ferris with a respectful, almost ceremonial motion, holding it with the same solemn gravity he gave to his own warhammer. For a moment, the two weapons and the two brothers faced each other, different in style, equal in honor. "As a return gift, brother, this warhammer is worthy of your hand." Fulgrim offered the weapon he had forged, presenting it with a casual grace. Ferris received it with equal solemnity, taking the furnace breaker and closing his fingers around the haft as if testing its balance. "Ferris Manus," Ferris announced his name to his brother, a rare approving note in his voice. "Fulgrim." The beautiful Primarch's face went serious. His voice, smooth and musical, answered, "My brothers may call me Fugan." They both laughed then, once more, without warning, wildness braided with refinement into a new, unexpected harmony. The two blood brothers, fresh from their forging contest, had come to a deep mutual recognition and respect. Their moment of private triumph was interrupted when a custodian in golden armor entered the forge. He strode forward, delivered a formal salute, and his voice, hollow and metallic beneath the helmet, intoned, "The Emperor requests your presence." Chapter 166. Matters on Terra Doom came out of the warp and found himself back in the solar system. In his mind it felt like no time had passed, as if yesterday's events were still fresh, but the galaxy had marched on. Years, perhaps decades, had gone by. The First Fleet had long since planted a beacon that let the Lionsgate spaceport regulate access to the inner system. Where once entry had been brutish and piecemeal, the Imperium's bureaucracy had grown precise and implacable. Now a ship could not simply appear at Terra. Multiple, overlapping authorizations were required to keep terrorists and infiltrators from reaching the throne world. The First Fleet itself had been halted at the approach. Only after Doom Novik disclosed his identity and credentials was he permitted to proceed. Sophia, the digital presence aboard his vessel, watched the clearance procedure with thinly veiled contempt. "They're humiliating you," she said. She had no love for the Imperium. Its weight and secrecy felt abhorrent to her, and the thorough, intrusive verification enraged her all the more. Doom merely shook his head slowly. There were no shortcuts on Terra. Its security existed for a reason, however unpleasant the execution. The Space Marine in charge of security dropped to one knee before the holocom and offered the warrior's salute, his voice crackling with formal contrition. "Great Primarch, I apologize," he said in full transmission. Doom Novik listened without anger, only a careful sadness in his tone. "What happened? The gene seed vault on the moon was attacked," the Marine replied plainly. "The Third Legion suffered heavy losses." Doom Novik's expression hardened for a moment. A gene seed vault, the very basis of a Legion's continuation, was irreplaceable. News like that sat like a stone in his chest. He returned the salute. "Thank you for carrying out your duty," he said softly. The Marine rose from his kneeling position, sensing the Primarch's gravity. "The Primarch of the Third has returned," he added. "He should be able to restore what was lost." At that, something like relief flickered through Doom Novik's features, and his eyes brightened. The return of a Primarch was a rallying point, a force that could steady a shattered Legion. The Marine gave one final salute, severed the hololink, and the transmission cut out. "The fleet will dock at Lionsgate Spaceport. We have dedicated berths there." Doom Novik barked the order, and without pause began to lay down the details. To Sophia he gave a steady stream of instructions. Seal all hatches while the fleet is docking. Restrict personnel movement. No unnecessary departures or shore leave. Inspect all supplies thoroughly so no stowaways slip aboard. Keep a close eye on all Adeptus Mechanicus personnel to prevent any technological leakage. He went on, ticking off dozens of precautions meant to anticipate every conceivable problem. Sophia wrote everything down with meticulous care. During the docking period, she would be responsible for material resupply and the security inspections, no small task when the fate of a fleet and the safety of the Imperial Palace could hinge on a single oversight. She understood the gravity of it. One after another, over 100 warships of the First Fleet, with the Royal Majesty at their core, pulled into Lion's Gate. The great ships took their assigned berths in sequence. Doom Novik led the destroyer warriors off the flagship and toward the Terra Imperial Palace, and behind them, anti-grav platforms hummed as they bore dozens of sealed crates and pallets. All material bound for the Imperial Palace had to clear exhaustive security checks. Cargo carried on behalf of the Primarch enjoyed special privileges, but those privileges only extended so far. Every item in the Primarch's manifest was personally inspected by the custodian guards. Sophia watched the procession and the inspections with a steadying breath, acutely aware that any lapse now could have consequences none of them could afford. This was a necessary procedure. The Emperor's body guards were meticulous, and anything brought before the Master of Mankind was inspected even more closely. Sophia's projection slipped back into the shadows, the digital life form choosing to stay out of the custodian's sharp-eyed scrutiny. Doom Novik and the destroyer warriors stood in line. He respected the Imperium's rituals and the golden-armored custodians who enforced them. He could have asked the Emperor or Malkador for a special pass and entered the Imperial Palace directly, but Doom Novik had always treated rules and hierarchies with the utmost deference. Privilege, he believed, was corrosive. The more it was used, the more it was squandered. Plato, La called, waving. The destroyer warriors brightened at the sight of a familiar face, the custodian known as Plato. Plato had personally selected Li Tang from among thousands, a choice that had led to the birth of the Legion's firstborn. The original destroyer warriors all remembered her. In response, the golden-clad custodian inclined her head and, as a courtesy, lifted her helmet. Her golden hair fell free, revealing a strikingly beautiful woman beneath the mask. "Are there women in the custodian guard?" Doom Novik asked La over their psychic link, sounding momentarily stunned. He hadn't expected female custodians. Like the Space Marines, he'd always assumed the guard were created only from suitable males. Seeing a woman today had upended that assumption. "Yes," La replied into the link to the Gene Father. "Most custodians are male, but a small number are female." "That's unexpected," Doom murmured, nodding and giving Plato a warm smile. "Lord Primarch." Lady Plato dropped to one knee and rendered the warrior's salute in respect. The custodian guard answered the Emperor's commands and held the warrior king in the same reverence as the Master of Mankind. Doom Novik raised a hand to the custodians, signaling them to stand. "No need for formalities," he said. "Thank you for choosing Li Tang. It was all a coincidence, just fate." Plato composed herself, set her features into a serious expression, and spoke in a steady, full voice. He succeeded entirely by his own will. As she said it, a warm twinge of embarrassment crept up on her. She couldn't help remembering the scene. The truth was, she had indulged in a small personal retaliatory act back then, a reaction to a string of disrespectful looks. La, clad in gleaming gold and black armor and standing a little taller than Plato, explained the purpose of the shipment. "They're all the same, gifts from the Gene Father to the Emperor." She gestured toward the stacked crates. 10,000 shield generators, all from the same production batch. It would have been impractical for the custodian guards to inspect each unit individually. Plato shook her head at La, and with the calm of an old friend, reminded him, "We have a duty. To protect the throne and the Emperor, we must be meticulous in every detail." "La," Primarch Doom Novik called to his descendant, his voice carrying the authority of the rank, "do not interfere with the custodian guard. Their duty must not be underestimated or neglected." The custodian guard was responsible not only for the person of the Emperor, but for the Imperial Palace's internal security. The palace contained countless critical points. There was no room for mistakes. Doom Novik understood that the Emperor would already be aware of his return. The fact that he had not been specially summoned only underscored how important the rules were. So he stepped back willingly, content to cooperate rather than press his privileges. He found, to his own surprise, that he was not anxious. It had been a long time since he had the leisure to simply stand and watch the small motions of palace life, the shifting of guards, the quiet choreography of duty, and he allowed himself to enjoy it. "Thank you for your understanding," Plato said gratefully to the Primarch before her. She appreciated that someone of his standing could recognize the hardships of lower ranks and respect the work they did. "These are gifts for you," Doom Novik said, nodding toward the crates of shield generators. He turned to the custodian guard and added, "As for where they should be installed, let the Emperor decide." "Thank you," Plato replied with a small, formal smile. He accepted the thanks without asking what the gifts actually were. It was his duty as a custodian to remain composed and unperturbed by outside matters. The inspection that followed felt both interminably slow and ruthlessly efficient. Instruments were run over every crate with painstaking care, yet the guards' hands moved with the precision of well-drilled automatons. 2 hours later, the last seal was checked, and the party was allowed to pass into the Imperial Palace's inner court. "That was suffocatingly tedious," a cool voice remarked as a blue holographic figure flickered back into being. The avatar, Sophia, the super-intelligent chip Doom Novik carried, wore an expression of human relief. Sophia's presence was constant. The chip rode with Doom Novik and provided both counsel and company. Doom Novik understood the scale of the Imperium's burdens and had no intention of making things harder for them. He addressed the guiding custodian, "Find Grand Vizier Malkador for us first." He had a few things to deliver to Malkador. "As you command," the custodian guard said without looking back, calm, unhurried, as they turned and led them on. After hours of riding, changing mounts, and walking, the party finally reached Malkador's residence. The Imperial Palace stretched on and on. Its borders were always expanding, and there were already plans to blanket the entire plateau with palace halls. The Grand Vizier's household buzzed with activity. Staff packed the corridors like a swarm, and the offices were a constant, distracting clamor. A Primarch could stride through and cause no more than a ripple. Everyone's attention was fixed on their tasks. Though nominally the Grand Vizier's private residence, this was the most intricate and administratively dense part of the palace. The custodians led them through the inner court into a quieter backyard where Malkador waited. The garden was composed with care, exotic flowers and grasses, clipped paths, and an artificial stream that chattered over flat stones. "Elder," Doom Novik called, seeing Malkador reclining in a pavilion. He smiled as he approached. His respect for the elder ran deeper even than his reverence for the Emperor. To Doom Novik, the Emperor's personality always seemed a little immature compared with Malkador's. Not that the Emperor lacked ability or strategic vision, this was purely a matter of temperament. Malkador smiled benignly and gestured toward the rough stone table. "Please, sit." He set the twin-headed Aquila scepter aside and laid out a simple tea service, personally brewing a pot for his guest. "Your visit is an unexpected pleasure," he said as he poured. "You are a rare guest indeed." Doom Novik picked up a tiny porcelain cup between 2 fingers. Human-sized utensils felt fiddly in his hands. "I have brought you a gift," he said. "A gift?" Malkador's brow creased with mild curiosity. "For whom?" Doom took a slow sip of the fragrant tea and said nothing. His gaze drifted toward the blue-clad figure standing nearby. "Central Law, Lady Sophia?" Malkador prompted, his voice calm. The blue figure inclined her head in a formal curtsy. Malkador's use of title was deliberate. There was no hint of condescension in it, no slight, only an even, unquestioning respect. Chapter 167, A Gift for the Adeptus Custodes. Sophia stepped forward, light shimmering across her form, and offered a delicate curtsy to Malkador. The digital life form said nothing. After a courteous bow, she fell back into the crowd. Doom made a crisp, single gesture to the nearby destroyer warrior, signaling the progenoid platform to bring the offering forward. Malkador watched the large box hover into view, fingertips idly tapping the rim of his teacup. "I have lived for thousands of years," he said, "and never once received a gift from an AI. I am quite curious what this will be." La released the key safe. Under the anti-gravity field, a mechanical construct rose, its head a perfect, featureless sphere, 1,000 flexible tentacles streaming beneath it like a metallic cascade. The device floated there serenely, each tendril making the slightest silent adjustments. Malkador frowned and turned to Sophia. "What is this?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. He had seen countless machines across the ages, but he could not immediately place the function of this particular construct. "Worker robots." Sophia stepped forward, and the machine's function card lit up on her palm. My personal gift to you. She had quietly added those robots to the list after learning Doom intended to present a gift to the Imperium. They weren't sentient, no high-level cognition, only basic logic modules, but they were built for one thing, grinding through vast amounts of repetitive work. Each unit sported 1,000 flexible tentacles and could operate 1,000 quills at once, which made their throughput extraordinary. Excellent, Lady Sophia, how thoughtful of you. Malkador's eyes brightened as he read the description. The present wasn't dazzling, but it was useful. As the Imperium's borders expanded, the Department of the Interior swelled to match, yet it always lagged behind. A mounting volume of complex, repetitive tasks had fattened the bureaucracy and slowed the processing of priority documents. There are 10 machines in total, Sophia said, offering them forward. Their processing power is the equivalent of 1,000,000 clerks, Sophia said, finishing her rundown of the machine's capabilities. As for keeping them from making mistakes, you have more options than I do. She had built the machines herself, so there were no mechanical flaws to worry about. Her warning pointed elsewhere. In the newer ring control center, just outside the central core, Doom had already stationed psychers to weave a protective psychic shield. From the mountains of data she'd gathered over years in Doom's service, Sophia had long suspected the hand of chaos. Warp entities from the Sea of Souls could taint even low-intelligence artificials, and the worker automata were powerful enough that any corruption would be disastrous. I'll put them to good use, Malkador said, his eyes shining. He understood the implication immediately. I'll see that they're properly protected. He traced the surface of the stone table with a fingertip. This is Terra, he murmured. Runes sprang to life under his touch, and a faint, silent ripple of psychic energy spread through the room. With the Emperor's arrays standing guard, they have no right even to look upon them with greed, Sophia declared. Wherever they work, I will lay down protective arrays myself to preserve the purity of the machines. Thank you for your gift, Lady Sophia. Malkador, the Imperial Regent, bowed deeply to the digital life form, his voice heavy with gratitude. Sophia only gave a slow, modest shake of her head and fell back to stand silently beside Doom. She has great love for humanity, Doom said between sips of fragrant tea, savoring the flavor before he spoke. She cannot bear to see human suffering. It was not that Sophia had been built with a code for gentleness. The trait had emerged from the slow evolution of her data. Since arriving in the Imperium of Man, she had often complained to Doom about the bloat and inefficiency of the administration. Her criticisms were sharp, but beneath them lay a real compassion for people. A gentle lady, Malkador murmured, and his thanks rang sincere. For a moment something like youth returned to his lined face. The cloudy, dim look in his old eyes cleared, replaced by a bright, keen wisdom as he absorbed the goodwill offered by the digital being. Elder, we should be going. With the meeting concluded, Doom rose from the stone stool. There are still things to deliver to the Emperor. He nodded toward the rear entrance where a key safe hovered on an anti-grav plate and said to Malkador, Please notify Constantin Valdor. Malkador's voice held a hint of surprise. For him as well? Yes. Doom's answer was plain. Malkador gave a satisfied nod. Though the Primarch and Valdor had rarely spent time together, Doom still remembered the Emperor's loyal steward, a small but telling sign of where his loyalties lay. Doom closed his eyes for a heartbeat to reach Valdor. 2 seconds later, he opened them and said, He'll come with us. He's with the Emperor. All right. Doom would not refuse to accompany the Elder, and meeting the Emperor was part of his plan. With Malkador joining them, their passage through the Imperial Palace met far fewer inspections and interruptions. As they made their way deeper into the palace, Doom spoke with the Elder and learned much about the recent state of the Imperium. Reports from across the Imperium detailed the progress of the conquests, the customs and traditions of newly contacted worlds, and, most eagerly, the returns of 3 lost Primarchs, those of the 2nd, 3rd, and 10th Legions. Of the 3 brothers, the 2nd's Primarch had come home first, followed by the 10th, and the 3rd not long after. The 2nd Legion had already put to sea on the Great Crusade, joining Horus in his advance and fighting at his side. Horus himself had praised the newly returned brother without reservation, lauding his command skill and declaring him worthy of the title war leader. The other two brothers were still preparing their legions on Terra. When their musters were complete, they too would join the crusade. They spoke as they climbed toward the Emperor's chamber. The small private office they had seen before was gone. The audience room now towered as a vast hall high within the imperial palace. With every step upward, the wind grew sharper and the air thinner. The Adeptus Custodes stood like statues along the way, their gilded armor powdered white with snow, cloaks frozen and hanging motionless in the biting gusts, as if they were part of the cold itself. All who gathered there bore an air beyond mortal measure. The storm that howled around them was no impediment, only a stark, dramatic frame for the scene. When Harlan followed Doom back to Terra, supposedly to meet his relatives, he had the bad manners to tell Malcador at dinner, "Terra isn't as good as Nur." That one sentence lodged itself in Malcador's mind. He brought his Aquila scepter down with a sharp rap on the impudent boy's head, but he did not waste time arguing the point. Instead, he answered with action. Malcador poured men, money, and influence into reshaping Terra's environment. He spared nothing and worked tirelessly to heal the planet's blighted seams. Now the first fruits of that effort showed. The snow that fell over the city had turned back to white instead of the black-gray filth it had been. Inside the grand hall, golden pillars rose, carved with intricate bas-reliefs. Stained glass, alive with color, caught the light. A rich red carpet ran to the throne, and in two rigid rows stood the Adeptus Custodes, their armor burnished gold. Everywhere, the Emperor's presence announced itself, sometimes brazenly lavish, sometimes quietly profound. On the throne, the Emperor himself sat, a shaft of living gold about him that made the whole chamber shimmer. Doom looked at the hall's excessive gilding, the showing-off display of light and ornament, and allowed a faint frown to pull at his features. Doom paused at the threshold out of respect for the Emperor's singular sense of ceremony. A moment before, entered. A noblewoman in the finery of a rogue trader had slipped away. Otherwise, the great hall was empty. Valdor, resplendent in gleaming gold plate, stood sentinel to the right of the throne platform, his presence a constant guard to the Emperor's majesty. "Doom Novik," Valdor intoned, his voice carrying down to those below the dais. "Welcome back from the Star Sea." Everyone present understood that it was the Emperor speaking through Valdor. The Praetorian's tones were merely the outward vessel for an inner voice, and Doom felt no surprise. He had long been accustomed to the Emperor's cultivated air of mystery. In truth, the Emperor had never been one for small talk. Private moments revealed a hesitant, awkward quality to his speech. He was a man of few words. Malcador gave Doom a brief, formal nod, then moved to stand at the Emperor's left. Doom inclined his head and motioned with one hand toward the line of custodians behind him. "Bring them up," he said aloud to the destroyer warrior. He chose to speak rather than issue the command by mind link. There was no need to advertise the Legion's psychic methods or to risk exposing more capability than required. The warrior obeyed and began to move the offerings forward. When dealing with the labyrinthine politics of the Imperium, it paid to keep a few cards close to your chest. To lay everything out at once was simple folly. 10 locked cases had been set out in front of Doom, arranged with deliberate neatness. He opened them himself. "Gifts for the Adeptus Custodes," he said as he bent and lifted a device from one of the cases. It was a shield generator, inlaid with a null crystal, small, exquisitely made, and strangely beautiful. He held it up for Valdor to see. The dimensional shield this crystal projects is superior to a void shield. Very few material weapons can pierce it. Sophia stepped forward without hesitation. Everyone present understood the reality of chaos. She did not need to spell it out. "Its dimensional barrier can even stand against demonic implements," she added, her voice steady as she addressed the master of mankind. At her words, the throne moved, a barely perceptible stirring. The Emperor's face remained hidden beneath its aura of golden light, but where others might have seen nothing, Doom and his Primarch sons caught the faint change and felt the significance of it. They could clearly see the Emperor's true form now, a middle-aged man with brown skin, his features registering genuine surprise. The sight of him taken aback was itself remarkable. There were few things in the material universe that could withstand demonic weapons. Auramite was one of those things, inert to psychic phenomena and resistant to the corrupting touch of chaos and demonic attack. Doom had brought them yet another unexpected revelation. Malcador's gaze rested on the shield generator with something like joy. Beside him, Constantin Valdor, Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, looked at Doom. The hard lines of his face softened, and his eyes, without a word, conveyed pure gratitude. Doom inclined his head in acknowledgement, then turned to the Emperor on the throne. In total, over 10,000 sets, he announced. The Norworlds are gifting them to the Adeptus Custodes, in thanks for their contributions and efforts in the Destroyer Warrior gene seed implantation work. I hope the Norworld's gifts will protect these selfless and noble warriors in the battles to come, whether they serve as Destroyer Warriors or as the Emperor's own custodians. United against humanity's common enemy, they are the backbone of the resistance against chaos. Chapter 168, The Shadow of the Ran. Dan, the Emperor, spoke publicly, a rare occurrence, and every head in the hall turned to him. Valdor, he said, addressing his loyal Captain General, these gifts from Nur are entrusted to you. See that they are used to their fullest. Valdor dropped to one knee before the throne, then rose and walked down from the dais. He gave a slight motion, and the Adeptus Custodes moved forward to carry the sealed strongboxes away. I am eternally grateful for this gift, Valdor said, looking up toward the Primarch. He placed his left hand over his chest in a warrior's salute, a gesture he seldom allowed himself, but which suited the moment. There is no need for thanks, Doom replied with understated gravity. There will come a day when we fight side by side. Protecting our allies is the duty of warriors. Valdor inclined his head, and for the first time on a face usually carved of stone, a friendly smile flickered. You possess extraordinary foresight, he said. Sophia stepped forward then. With a few slender, deliberate taps, she reached into the strongbox's contents and let the encoded gift sing through the air. Light and data coalesced into a visible thread as she fed the information directly into the systems of the Captain General's armor. The gift was one of digital life, not mere storage of files, but the living manipulation of code and electronic constructs. Where others saw inert machinery, Sophia saw patterns, behaviors, and potential, and she bent them to her will. Valdor watched it all with a mixture of awe and helplessness. He had spent his life mastering blade and strategy. This living web of data, was a different kind of weapon. He could not hide the small shake of his head at an ability he neither possessed nor fully understood. The digital bulwark the code artisans had raised proved useless. Once the small formalities were finished, Doom smoothed his face into an expression of careful neutrality and addressed the Emperor. You didn't summon me all this way just for a reunion with my brothers, did you? He was not so naive as to believe the Lord of Terra had called him back across the stars merely for family matters. The Emperor was practiced in concealment, fond of wrapping truth in riddles and appearances. Valdor spoke a single word, Randan, and the Emperor's will seemed to settle on him like a shawl. Doom echoed it quietly, eyes narrowing. Randan? 2 syllables, nothing more. There was little for him to read in such a name. Here are the particulars. Valdor tapped his spear shaft on the deck and a hollow sprang up from the pillar beside him. Randan, a strange name, attached to a dread Xenos species. The report unfolded. A patrol of the 5th Legion, sweeping the void in the Swirlhorn Morse system, had found a vessel of that species. The legionaries struck, tore into the alien hull, and boarded. What they discovered inside was so astonishing it shook the survivors' minds, so much so that the name Randan carried with it not only mystery, but a new and very specific dread. The interior of the Xenos ship was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, a crowded alien ecosystem where humans and a variety of Xenos lived side by side. When the Space Marines breached it, those mixed inhabitants answered with a single terrifying fury. Humans and aliens alike screamed and surged forward in a fanatical counterattack, undaunted by death, wielding weapons that were anything but primitive and pressing the assault with overwhelming numbers. The initial boarding party was nearly swept aside. Realizing the threat, the 5th Legion threw a second wave at the ship. a rapid, surgical raid meant to recover survivors and prisoners and to regain the initiative. The Marines fought their way through cramped corridors and route-like passageways, taking prisoners where they could and applying every interrogation and reconnaissance technique at their disposal. The intelligence they extracted came only in shards, conflicting accounts, garbled names, half-mapped routes. What could be verified, however, was simple and stark. The Xenos' homeworld was called Randan. Lacking any other true ethnonym, the Legion cataloged the species as the Randan. Beyond that single fact, there was almost nothing. No reliable information on the range of their territory, no clear estimate of their numbers, no coherent picture of their military organization or capabilities. Every lead dissolved into contradictions or silence. Doom watched the debriefing in grim silence, brows drawn tight. The more the Legion pushed, the thinner the answers became, and his face grew colder by the hour. Men and machines had gone to work with all the 5th Legion's resources, skill, ruthlessness, every method of intelligence gathering they possessed, yet the result was scant. This paucity of information was not a reflection of incompetence. It was a warning that something about the Randan and the ways they hid themselves remained dangerously unknown. If the Xenos could shield their species' intelligence from the methods the Space Marines used, then they had to be extraordinarily powerful. He kept reading as the report scrolled past his eyes. The 5th Legion's greatest discovery wasn't just an enemy. It was the reason humans and Xenos were living together on that vessel. The humans and the lesser Xenos weren't acting of their own will. They were slaves to another kind of Xenos. A far more terrifying species had invaded their minds and bent their wills. Under that control, subordinates obeyed without question, charging forward with no fear of death and no regard for their own losses. Doom's face tightened as he absorbed the implications. This was bad. This was worse than bad. Randan, a name in the files. Xenos capable of manipulating the minds of other species. Their very existence was a catastrophic threat. Even worse than their power to control was the absolute devotion they elicited from those they dominated. Once a mind was taken, it followed its master without hesitation, willing to give itself up entirely. That kind of conversion made terrifying soldiers. Ordinary mortals, stripped of fear and driven by unwavering obedience, could be turned into a force of devastating ferocity. The 5th Legion had pushed deeper into the system and uncovered a substantial Xenos presence in the Swirlhorn Morse sector. The invaders were not content to skirmish. They were on an expansionist crusade. Fast-moving expeditionary forces struck repeatedly, overrunning multiple human worlds. Using local natural resources and their profane technology, they were fashioning obedient legions of slaves. After hazardous close-range reconnaissance, the 5th Legion came to a grim, cautious conclusion. The Randan posed a direct threat to the survival of the Imperium of Man. Doom's pupils contracted sharply. The 5th Scouts were the most professional within the Legion, methodical, conservative, and seldom given to alarmist judgments. For them to classify the Randan as an existential threat spoke volumes about how terrifying this Xenos foe must be. Even the Space Marines felt that instinctive, cold dread. The projection cut off abruptly after that, leaving no further data. The report ended with a single line: "We are unable to gather more information." In that plain sentence, Doom read everything the hologram did not say: the helplessness of the Scouts, the weight of their guilt, and the knowledge that whatever they had found might already be beyond the reach of any rescue. The Legion's soldiers carried a heavy guilt, for losing dozens of battle brothers in the opening engagements, and for the scant intelligence their close-range recon had managed to bring back. Doom felt that guilt as keenly as they did. He understood their self-reproach for having failed in their duty. The questions nagged at everyone. What were the Xenos' racial traits? Where was their homeworld? Which of them had been responsible for the mental domination? The report painted a picture of a powerful, elusive species, something wrapped in shadow rather than light. The Council of War was unsettled by the findings and refused to leap to conclusions. In the end, the dossier was passed up to the Master of Mankind for a final decision. After reading the summary, Doom rose and fixed his gaze on the Emperor, elevated upon the dais. "I will take this task," he said. "How many troops will you assign me?" Without hesitation, Doom accepted the burden and immediately threw himself into preparations. Malkador, leaning on his Aquila scepter, stepped forward with a sheaf of papers and read off the requisition. 100 capital warships and 1 million Imperial auxiliaries. 50,000 Space Marines of the First Legion are assembling on the Forge World Shana, he continued, supported by the Forge World's Ecclesiarchy Guard. Doom inclined his head in agreement, fingers twitching as he rapidly ran the numbers in his head. Against the Randan threat, that kind of force should, be enough. From the dais, the Emperor's long, even voice cut through the murmurs. "My child, 1,000 Adeptus Custodes will accompany you." The remark snapped Doom out of his calculations. The Emperor's words carried weight. Bringing custodians suggested more than routine precaution. Doom let the silence hang for a beat, then asked plainly, "What is the outcome of this war? What did your vision show?" The Emperor sighed, a small, weary sound that seemed to dim the air around him like a dying star, and answered simply, "Nothing." The single word landed like a blow. Doom stared at the throne, shocked. The Emperor's sigh and his terse reply were the last thing he had expected. The Emperor's psychic power could unmake galaxies, but not even he could find a clear answer in this single prophecy. He shook his head and admitted the helpless truth. The Randan are very powerful. Too many destinies involving great entities are entangled. The prophecy has grown inaccurate, a vague, ethereal mist. He went on, solemn and unambiguous. "The only conclusion I can draw is this. If the Imperium is to defeat the Randan, the cost will be immense." Doom felt no regret. Prophecy was expendable to him. What surprised him was relief. If the seer's vision had been clear, precise, and promising for the Imperium, the Emperor would likely have bent the future to make it so. The Emperor's reluctance to force a favorable outcome was, paradoxically, encouraging. It meant the path forward would be theirs to shape. The old maxim from the Nur War College came back to him. Gamble with courage against the future. Everything is made by one's own hand. "I'll leave at once," Doom said, already preparing to go. The Forge World of Shana lay ahead. The Xenos threat was imminent. Reaching the assembly point early would buy them the time they would need to prepare for war. "No need to rush," the Emperor called after Doom as he turned away. "First, meet your brothers." Doom looked back, puzzled. The Emperor's expression softened as he explained, "The First Legion is pulling back from the other battlefields, and assembling the Ecclesiarchy Guard will take time. A few hours won't change anything. Come with me." The Emperor rose from his throne, the divine radiance that surrounded him dimmed. "This hall is too formal. It isn't right for a brotherly gathering." He stepped down, golden armor flashing, a heavy red silk cloak trailing behind him. "Come with me." "Have the others assemble at Lion's Gate Spaceport," Doom said to Ra, ready to depart at a moment's notice. Then he fell into step behind the Emperor. If Nur himself were leading this war, Doom would have dropped everything and gone straight to the front, but this was the Imperium. Deployment of the bulk of the forces against the Randan was its responsibility. "How are the supplies?" he asked Sophia, whose staff was coordinating the logistics. 90% of the supplies are ready," Sophia said, her eyes flickering with streams of data as she calculated. "At this rate, the fleet will be fully provisioned in 3 hours." "Excellent. Be prepared to depart at a moment's notice." Doom acknowledged her, with a curt nod, then fell in step behind the departing Emperor, Malkador, and the others. 171. "I want to challenge him." A golden-armored Adeptus Custodes stepped into the forge, his presence cutting through the conversation between the two Primarchs. "The Master of Mankind summons you," he announced, then turned and left without further explanation. Fulgrim and Ferris exchanged a look, confusion clear on both their faces. They both knew the Custodes were their father's personal guard, the living extension of his will. Fulgrim's fingers rested lightly on Ferris's iron arm, a silent prompt to follow. Ferris did not protest. They fell into step and left the forge together, shoulder to shoulder, each carrying the weapon the other had given him. Fulgrim kept his posture elegant, his sword held in one hand while he tugged his brother along with the other. "Why has father summoned us?" he asked the custodian walking beside them. A pleasant, magnetic voice answered, as if speaking directly into Fulgrim's ear. The custodian beneath the ornate helm gave a brief, involuntary twitch at the corner of his mouth, an expression that betrayed a sliver of discomfort beneath his composed exterior. The warrior king has returned, an Adeptus Custodes announced, explaining why the master of mankind had summoned the Primarchs. Fulgrim's violet eyes flared. A brother he had never met, this had to be a champion of terrible renown. Doom Novik, Ferris murmured. He remembered the welcome, the ceremony personally hosted by the master of mankind, the recounting of the Imperium's history. Ferris had been granted the rare honor of that personal greeting. That great brother had found his way home among the stars. For now, he was the only Primarch to have returned of his own will. Doom Novik? Fulgrim asked softly, turning to his brother. Ferris, do you know him? Ferris nodded once, solemn and expectant. He spoke the names like relics. The Warrior King, Lord of the Stars, King Novik, Destroyer Warrior. Fulgrim's eyes narrowed and his mouth parted slightly. Look at that. When they stepped out of the forge, their view suddenly widened. Ferris lifted his breaker's hammer and pointed out toward the distance. Fulgrim followed his brother's gesture and saw a double-headed eagle suspended there. Its chest bore a small, mysterious mark. Ferris tapped the spot. The emblem of our brother, he said. He shook his head and sighed. His place is not beneath the Imperium. He is its partner, one of its pillars. A sudden light came into Fulgrim's eyes. So that's what it means. He understood now. His legion, the Emperor's children, had been given a special honor by the Master of Mankind. They were permitted to use the double-headed eagle as a decoration on their armor. When he had first noticed the rune on the eagle's chest, he dismissed it as some obscure symbol. Ferris's explanation made its significance plain. That is his personal sign, Ferris went on, staring at the emblem, a note of envy in his voice. It will last as long as the Imperium endures. He looked almost wistful at the eagle, at the thought of a great brother whose mark had been taken into the Imperium's memory and set before all to see. Even after the Great Crusade had finally ended, even if someday the Primarchs and the Space Marines were forgotten, one brother's mark would remain woven into the fabric of the Imperium, a witness to every rise and fall that followed. Ferris felt that thought like a hollow ache in his chest. He wondered, not for the first time, what kind of strength or talent could win that sort of everlasting praise. He hesitated, then turned. His flamboyant brother had stopped and was standing very still. The Adeptus Custodes nearby looked equally puzzled, staring at the figure who might as well have been a living peacock. Under their questioning gazes, Fulgrim, uncharacteristically serious, pointed at his robe, dark with sweat and streaked with ash. Adeptus Custodes, he said, tell your brothers to have my sons bring me a fresh garment. Then he looked at Ferris with earnestness that felt almost childlike. Brother, shall I get one for you, Eziak? Well? Ferris went silent for a long moment. He shook his head, unable to speak at first. No, he said finally. If I am to meet such an extraordinary brother, I should look my best. Fulgrim lifted his chin, revealing a clean jaw, and gave a proud little smile. In the most perfect posture, he declared. Ferris's lips twitched. Then let us be on our way, he said, and reached out to tug him along. He is the Warrior King, isn't he? Fulgrim wrenched his arm free from Ferris's iron grip and fixed the Adeptus Custodes with a grave look. Yes, the custodian answered with solemn certainty. The Warrior King, personally acknowledged by my lord. Fulgrim's lips curved with arrogant resolve as he lifted the flaming sword, letting his fingers trail along the blade. I want to challenge him. Brother Fulgrim? Why? Ferris asked, puzzled. For a title? No. Fulgrim's pride fell away, replaced by a quiet determination. I pursue perfection in all things. Swordsmanship and combat are no exception. Father himself acknowledged the Warrior King's power. I want to test my skill against him and to see my brother's strength for myself. Ferris's heavy mouth opened as if to protest, the words forming and then swallowed. He studied Fulgrim's face and saw the earnestness there. At last he nodded. Very well, let's go. He took Fulgrim's arm and led the way, deeper into the Imperial Palace. As the three of them walked, one of the Adeptus Custodes killed the external speaker on his helmet, switched his comms to a private channel, and, making sure the Captain General was not included, said quietly over the wire, Colleagues, hold on a moment. The Lord of the Third Legion is challenging the Warrior King. Even the Adeptus Custodes were only human beneath their gilded armor. Behind their stoic faces, they could still be amused by gossip. There was a beat of silence on the channel, then a ripple of reactions. Surprise, skepticism, amusement. Seriously, a custodian wouldn't lie to another custodian. Lie, and you can go patrol the sewers yourself. It's true, the Lord of the Third Legion said it personally. The custodian swore softly, then felt two heavy gazes fall on him. Can't talk anymore. Almost got caught by the two Primarchs, he murmured, and forced his stance into composure. He straightened, adjusted his spear, and tried to hide the flush of embarrassment the scrutiny had caused. Fulgrim and Ferris had glanced at him, then withdrew their looks. As Primarchs, even the smallest, most guarded gestures did not go unnoticed. Not wishing to trouble the Adeptus Custodes, they picked up their pace as the golden-helmed guardians escorted them to the Master of Mankind's residence. Along the way, they passed an Emperor's Children attendant in purple livery who presented Fulgrim with a new garment, a sumptuous purple robe befitting his station. The Custodes led them on to the Imperial Garden. Before their feet had even crossed the threshold, a bright, boastful voice carried out from within. When it comes to barbecuing, Nur's second, and no one dares claim first. The two exchanged puzzled looks and hurried inside. What met them stopped them for a moment. The Master of Mankind had shed his battle plate and was dressed in simple robes, seated cross-legged on the lush lawn with a plate of grilled meat in his lap. Through the Emperor's psychic presence, he still appeared absolutely perfect to his two sons. Opposite him sat Malkador, squinting as he savored a bite, a smudge of grease at the corner of his mouth. Nearby, Valdor stood in gleaming gold, unconcerned by any mess, carefully turning the meat at the grill. A woman in a long blue dress sat on the grass, smiling as she watched the small domestic scene unfold. The sight was so warm and ordinary that the two Primarchs at the garden gate blinked and rubbed their eyes, as if their minds had briefly failed to accept it. When their vision cleared, they saw a broad-shouldered man standing at a barbecue, tending the meat. He had his back to them, utterly absorbed in the task. The Mem and Doom was turning a skewer when a sudden intensity of stares prickled the back of his neck. He set the meat down and turned. Two tall figures filled the garden entrance, radiating presence. One gripped a warhammer. A blacksmith's apron hung over his broad chest. He wore a buzz cut and a square jaw, his face smudged with grease, which only underscored the rugged dignity of his features. The other carried a gleaming longsword. He stood straight and proud, silver-white hair falling around a face marked by eyes the color of amethysts, and a single hand resting on his hip, every inch the picture of nobility. No introductions were necessary. Doom recognized them immediately. Only his brothers could move and hold themselves with such an undeniable air. "Brothers," Doom called, waving with a warm, cheerful smile. "Come in quickly. I've been waiting for you." It had been Doom's idea to hold a barbecue in the garden, a casual picnic meant to strengthen the bonds between father and sons and among the brothers themselves. With Malkador's encouragement, the Master of Mankind agreed without hesitation. He welcomed the chance to bring them together. What troubled him most, however, was how to relate to his 21 sons. Publicly, he was the Master of Mankind and had to embody power and purpose to inspire them. The easiest lesson he could teach was by example. Demonstrate strength, show an unshakable will to conquer the galaxy, and his sons would follow, emulate him, and together wipe out the enemies of humanity. Beyond that, though, he had little to offer. Privately, he was not a skilled father. He didn't know how to interact with them in ordinary human ways. Nearly all the guidance he gave was about war and conquest. Perhaps, when he had traded souls with chaos, the Master of Mankind treated them as tools. But now, standing before these extraordinary beings, something else overwhelmed him. A deep, genuine pride. A true, paternal love. The demigods who called him father looked at him with nothing but pure respect and reverence. And yet he felt a piercing guilt. He had drawn them out of the warp and shaped them into the semblance of men, but he did not know how to teach them to be human, or how to guide them to surpass humanity. Chapter 172. Fever Arena. Fanatical Arena. A booming voice cut through the haze and roused the two stunned Primarchs. Fulgrim and Ferris blinked awake. The Master of Mankind no longer looked like the majestic Gene-father they remembered. His current guise was startlingly different. They turned away from him and fixed their gaze on a tall brother who stood apart from the crowd. He was striking, bare-chested, his muscular torso etched with crimson runes, his lower half clad only in a simple kilt and battle boots. Thick black brows slashed above eyes that seemed bottomless, a strong, prominent nose, and a face carved with heroic features that carried an unmistakable air of sovereignty. He looked every inch a king. Both brothers took him in and almost unconsciously nodded to themselves. He was born to rule. His bearing alone made him impossible to ignore. Buoyed by his presence, Fulgrim and Ferris straightened, chest out, as if to prove they belonged beside him. Fulgrim slipped off his sandals and planted his bare feet on the green lawn, draping his long robe over one arm and moving toward their brother with impeccable posture. Ferris handed the ruin breaker to the custodes, then went to the garden fountain and cupped clear water in his hands to wash the grease from his face. Fulgrim, wrapped in purple robes, glided to Doom's side and spoke in a voice as soft as silk. "Those close to me may call me Fugan." Doom didn't hesitate. He set his skewer down, called him Fugan with affection, and reached out. Fulgrim, aloof, noble in his purple, took his hand naturally. Their large hands closed around one another. Both Primarchs wore genuine, easy smiles. Ferris, his grime rinsed away, stood by the grill and offered his silver-gray iron hand. Doom's eyes flickered at the sight of the metal. Surprise, then a touch of pain, but he lifted his other hand and took Ferris's. The iron was cool beneath his fingers. "It must have been an extraordinary experience, wasn't it?" he asked, his concern plain in his voice. Ferris felt the warmth in his palm, the genuine greeting from his brother, and his thick brows lifted a fraction. He had never known such concern before. Those iron hands had granted him extraordinary strengths, yet he had never taken pride in them. He had tried, by every means he could imagine, to rid himself of those silver arms. "It was an extraordinary experience," Ferris said, smiling easily, as if to brush the past aside. He squeezed his brother's hand more tightly. The simple contact brought him a surprising warmth. In his chest he found a reluctant approval of Doom, the careful insight, the way he could see into the depths of a man's soul, and the plain, unforced feeling behind his words. All of it moved Ferris. "Ha! Ha!" With a brother on either side, Doom threw his head back and laughed loudly. His boldness was contagious. Ferris and Fulgrim joined in, and the three of them exchanged looks and smiled. "You two, wait over there." Doom released their hands and waved his brothers toward the master of mankind. "I'll fetch something for you to eat." Ferris nodded and strode to the master's side, sitting cross-legged without another word. "Brother." Fulgrim's eyes burned with excitement as he fixed Doom with a look full of challenge. Doom regarded his radiant brother and gave a slight encouraging gesture. Open and unembarrassed, Fulgrim didn't hesitate. "I want to spar with you." The garden seemed to grow solemn at once. The father's gaze fell upon him, and cold sweat broke out on Fulgrim's smooth brow as he realized how bold, how potentially offensive his request might be. To ask for a duel on their very first meeting, would their father be displeased? Doom's voice cut through the tension. "You may," he agreed without hesitation, then smiled at Fulgrim. He jabbed a finger toward the spits over the fire with a teasing edge. "But you have to finish those first." "Of course." His brother's easy generosity earned Doom Fulgrim's immediate approval. Such largesse alone seemed to make him worthy of the title King. "Wait over there, then." Doom waved, indicating the place beside the Master of Mankind, as if the earlier incident meant nothing. In Nur's way of life, warriors sparred openly. Combat forged bonds as readily as it tested skill. He assumed Fugan's challenge had been no more than that, a request to spar and grow closer, and took no offense. Fulgrim sat down next to the Master of Mankind with his back straight, his heart taut as a drawn bow. A perfectionist by nature, he chastised himself for making an impulsive, ill-timed request. Had his thoughtless behavior angered his father? For a family reunion, it had been disruptive and discourteous. The Master of Mankind let his gaze travel over the two sons, taking in their trembling forms without overstepping. "Don't be nervous," Malcador said, forcing a gentle smile, kind, almost unbearably kind. The Master of Mankind lifted his hand and, with a small, formal gesture, signaled Valdor to bring the roasted meat across. He sliced the steak on the plate into 4 neat portions and set them before his 2 sons and an old friend. With a slight parting of his lips, he said only one word, "Eat." Ferris and Fulgrim started, clutching their porcelain plates with both hands, too surprised even to speak. The master of mankind's quiet command only deepened their reverence. They dared not disobey. They began to eat at once, awkwardly using knives and forks, their smiles stiff and automatic. Malkador watched their nervous faces and, suppressing a laugh, shook his head. "Let's eat together," he said. Doom returned then with his own roast and took a seat, and his presence broke the tension. The master relaxed, and his 2 sons visibly loosened up. Suddenly the room felt much warmer. The odd little father and son's barbecue finished quickly, neatly suited to both host and guests. When the meal was over, they made their way to the Imperial Palace arena. On arrival, they found several Space Marines already at practice, striking and parrying in measured, disciplined rhythm. Word must have leaked. More custodians than usual lined the stands. Towering destroyer warriors stood among them, having caught wind, unofficially, that the Gene Father would be sparring with the Lord of the Third Legion. The Master of Mankind above, Lord Malkador, great Primarchs. Space Marines and mortals alike dropped to their knees, voices raised in a single awed chorus. The mortals trembled with excitement at the thought of witnessing such a gathering. The Master of Mankind, Malkador, and the Primarchs, these were the holiest names in the Imperium, and they were all present. The Custodes and the Destroyer warriors did not kneel. It was a privilege they enjoyed. Their voices rang out instead, calling the Master of Mankind and the Warrior King by name. The mere presence of the Master and the Primarchs had set the arena alight. The Master of Mankind radiated a golden light. He lifted a hand, and the custodians, answering his will, relayed his command. "Stand back, and direct your cheers to the Warrior King and the Lord of the Third Legion." The arena, humanity's most primal test of combat, was about to be displayed by 2 Primarchs. Who? The Space Marines fell back to the stands, murmuring in low voices while their primal cheers built into a steady drum-like rhythm. 2 black-armored destroyer warriors strode out, each bearing a greatsword, and presented the weapons to the 2 Primarchs. By the time the Master agreed to the spar, Sophia had already prepared. She had forged 2 practice swords in the ship's workshop, scaled to the Primarch's proportions from her scans. Doom hefted his solid practice blade, testing its weight in his hand, then offered it to Fulgrim. "Please, my brother," he said. Fulgrim took the longsword. His white hair streamed behind him as he strode spiritedly to the center of the arena. Under the gaze of the Master of Mankind, the 2 Primarch brothers began their glorious sparring. One moved with heroic, godlike grandeur. The other was exquisitely beautiful, carrying himself with a noble aust divine poise. The Space Marines watched, wide-eyed and breathless. These superhuman warriors now moving like mortals, the 2 brothers' hearts pounding wildly. To witness a duel between 2 Primarchs was a rare honor and a stroke of fortune. Doom's face was stone still, both hands wrapped around the hilt as he held the blade vertically before him, the edge cutting his profile in half. Then he lowered the longsword, tracing a slow semicircle through the air. Sparks hissed as steel scraped stone. The nerd dueling ritual was complete, a small, sharp ceremony loaded with meaning. Fulgrim set his left hand over his abdomen, gripped his own longsword in his right, and inclined himself toward Doom. "Please," he said. With a simultaneous roar, both Primarchs lunged, weapons raised, and charged at each other. Author's note: I'm aiming for 4, maybe even 5 updates. Watch me super evolve. If you spot any typos, please point them out. Writing this much gets confusing, and Chidion's AI isn't perfect. Chapter 173, Primarch Competition. 2 Primarchs, demigods among mortals, the strongest beings in the physical universe. They moved with such speed that they reached, and in places even exceeded, the limits of the material world. When they struck, only after images lingered. It took the onlookers a long beat to realize those shadowy echoes were not shapes at all, but the residue of time. Ordinary mortals could barely register what had happened. Space Marines, for all their transhuman enhancements, saw no more than 2 dark blurs and could not pick out the Primarch's actual movements. Of the countless spectators, only 4 could follow the duel clearly: the Master of Mankind, Malkador, Ferris, and Valdor. The master of mankind's perception was almost incomprehensible. As the greatest individual in the physical universe, his gaze cut through illusion and time. He took in every nuance of their combat. Ferris, himself a Primarch, had a similarly keen eye. He could discern the clash of the two brothers' longswords as if watching them at arm's length. Valdor and Malkador, each honed in different ways, completed the handful who could read the true rhythm of the fight, while the rest of the galaxy saw only echoes. Malkador shut his eyes and extended his mind, pushing his psychic sight into the furious duel between the master of mankind's sons. Even for an immortal whose powers bent reality itself, the clash was almost too fast and too bright to resolve. If he had rashly engaged a Primarch without those careful preparations, the fight would have been over before his wards had finished forming. It was Constantin Valdor, the least gifted of the four observers, who managed to fix his gaze on the combat. Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, an unshakable servant of the Master, Valdor concentrated every ounce of his perception until he could follow the blows in clear detail. He felt powerless. The superhuman bodies of the Custodes, magnificent though they were still something less than the demigods born of the warp. Fulgrim moved like a waterfall of hair and silk, each step quick, each gesture elegant. His ornate longsword flowed as if it were wind itself. His swordplay was as flawless and beautiful as the Primarch who wielded it, every swing an aesthetic display in motion. Opposite him, Doom met the assaults with calm precision. His longsword flashed without flourish, a regal, disciplined style that relied not on raw edge, but on total control and encompassing command. When the two longswords met, a crisp clang split the air. Each blow carried the will of its wielder, their swordplay a direct expression of their nature, so that the intersection of steel became an argument as much as a strike. In that instant, the contrasts were plain. Fulgrim's blade moved with baroque, extravagant grace, seeking to dazzle and unbalance. Doom's replies were calm, austere, and implacably righteous, each parry driven by unshakable purpose. Doom stood composed, absorbing and redirecting every furious assault. Fulgrim danced between defenses, impossibly quick, probing for the smallest seam in his opponent's guard amid a storm of flashing steel. In less than 10 seconds they had exchanged well over 1,000 impacts. The swords flared red from the heat of their collisions. The spectators could not follow with their eyes. Space Marines shut their lids against the speed of it and listened instead, using keener hearing to pick out the slight differences in tone and pace at the moment of each clash. The golden-armored Adeptus Custodes who had come to watch fared no better. Even those mighty warriors were barely more capable of tracking the Primarchs than the Space Marines. In front of the two demigods, all of them were simply too slow. In a straight fight against a Primarch, Space Marines fell before they could react. Even the Adeptus Custodes were cut down only after they had managed to respond. Against that scale of power, the practical difference between the two was negligible, like putting a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old in front of a fully grown man. The outcome was the same. "Excellent swordsmanship," Fulgrim said, lips curving into a perfect smile as he praised his brother's skill. He said it without letting up. His assault never slackened, a continuous barrage meant to probe to find the pattern in Doom's blade work. "Your swordsmanship is very sharp," Doom replied earnestly. He had never seen anything so fierce and so beautiful. The speed was extraordinary. Every angle of attack was razor-precise, every feint and cut without flaw. Doom had never been in a duel of such intensity, and he suspected he rarely ever would again. But as the fight stretched on, the initial heat between them cooled, and Fulgrim's confident, beautiful smile began to fade. A terrifying truth revealed itself. However he struck, however he adjusted his tempo and posture, his longsword was always met and stopped by Doom. Blades rang out in a chorus of metal on metal. Fulgrim's longsword became a blur, every strike aimed at Doom's vital points, not mere demonstrations, but attacks sharpened to the breaking edge. He forced himself harder with each pass, honing his cuts, driving his offense to a razor point. He had to be more aggressive, to throw everything into his swordsmanship and leave nothing held back. Doom felt the change instantly. His face remained unreadable as he met a thrust with a cool backhand, the two blades clashing and sliding apart. He flowed with the motion and parried again, perfectly timing the counter as if he'd seen it coming a heartbeat earlier. Fulgrim pulled back, gathered himself, and then let his blade flash. The sword spun into a silver fan of light, momentum building into a new onslaught, a furious storm of blows that crashed like giant waves. His purple eyes were ice-cold. Every strike carried a distinct, chilling intent. This was no longer practice or play. He pressed forward, relentless, driving the tempo and hunting for any opening. Still, Doom absorbed or redirected every move. No matter how Fulgrim varied his angles or forced the tempo, his brother met him. Parry after parry, unshaken. Frustration tightened in Fulgrim's chest. He poured everything into his attacks and yet could not break Doom's defense, not even a hair's breadth. The intricate thrusts he had spent years perfecting were useless now. By simply defending, his brother was neutralizing the swordplay Fulgrim prided himself on. Every attack felt like a mud-caked ox wading into the sea. No wake, no effect. After 1,000 exchanges, there was nothing but mounting frustration. It was like a child straining with all his might while a master indulged him for sport, infuriating and pointless. Facing the onrush of swordlight, Doom stayed absolutely calm, not a flicker crossing his eyes. Blades met spine to spine, and once more, Doom bent and redirected Fulgrim's momentum. He had not struck first in the duel. He had allowed his brother to unleash every flourish. Another crisp clang signaled the end. Fulgrim sprang back and landed as lightly as a dancer. His purple robe billowed, long hair fanned about his shoulders, and his pale skin caught the sunlight, still the picture of grace. The Primarch remained elegant and composed. Primarchs had uncanny stamina. When Fulgrim paused, he drew a slow, deep breath, and the last traces of physical fatigue slid away. But physical weariness was nothing compared to the sting of mental failure, and shame at his own mind hit hardest of all. From chemos until now, he had faced every conceivable trial, and never had he felt so helpless and hollow. He looked up at his brother. Doom stood perfectly still, shoulders square, breathing steady. His face betrayed no effort. His posture was simple and absolute, like an unassailable peak. In one fluid motion, he twirled his longsword into a blossoming flourish and offered Fulgrim a dazzling smile. Fulgrim's heart lurched, as if a tidal wave had broken over him. He raised his blade almost without thinking, an instinctive counterstroke, then winced at his own reflex. He, who chased perfection above all, had felt a tremor inside himself, a fissure named doubt. More terrifying than failure itself, that doubt spread like a bottomless chasm, eating at his pride. Color drained from his face. His normally warm, jade-tinted skin went paper pale in an instant. The shift on the field did not go unnoticed. The 4 onlookers exchanged concerned frowns. The master of mankind's gaze was like a torch, sweeping the field and taking in everything that happened. Fulgrim's swordplay raged like a storm, but it did not so much as unnerve Doom. His proud, flawless technique suddenly looked like child's play. Paleness crept across his face as if an invisible crack were slowly devouring his pride. Fulgrim is utterly defeated, the master of mankind's voice echoed in the 3 men's minds, calm as still water. I expected him to lose this contest, but I did not expect him to fall to Doom, and to himself. Malcador shook his head. His psychic presence carried a ripple of regret. Pride makes them strong, and yet it also makes them fragile, he said. Against weaker or equal foes, Fulgrim can afford that pride. He has the means. But confronted by someone truly superior, the pride born of his power is smashed by a greater force and turns inward into doubt. Ferris said nothing. He drew a long breath through flared nostrils, a premonition already pressing at him. This was no simple duel. The battle could easily slip beyond anyone's control. He glanced sideways at the master of mankind. The Emperor's radiant, sacred face was stripped of all expression, his eyes fixed on the arena, as if emptied of thought. "Should we stop them?" Valdor asked within the master's mind, his fingers tightening on the spear of the Emperor, ready to end the contest at a moment's notice. There was no advantage to letting the 2 sides keep fighting. Malcador shook his head. No need, let it conclude naturally. He let the situation on the field unfold. Better that Fulgrim lose honorably than that he nurse a grudge. Valdor nodded and loosened his grip, abandoning the idea of intervening. Let them fight. Once a victor was clear, they would stop. Even the smallest tremor in the Primarch's body did not escape the attention of the extraordinary assembly. The arena fell silent. No one dared make a sound. "Brother." Doom felt the weight of the moment and moved toward Fulgrim, intent on ending the duel. He called out, but Fulgrim lifted a hand, cutting him off and halting him in his tracks. Chapter 172. The Wounding of Pride. Continue. Fulgrim raised the hot crimson longsword in his hand. His face was blank. The confident smile that usually played at the corner of his mouth had vanished. In its place was a look of wounded sorrow, his purple eyes fixed on Doom and laced with a flicker of anger. The blade at his side had done more than draw blood. It had shattered his composure. What had begun as a friendly duel to test skill had turned into a public humiliation. "In Nurse culture, exchanges like this are common," Doom said, stepping back. "They're meant to expose weaknesses, correct faults, and refine one's technique." He had never expected such a refined, elegant brother to take it this way. A cultural gap had twisted his gesture into an insult. Fulgrim might have believed Doom was mocking him for everyone's amusement, deliberately establishing an imbalance, the posture of a senior correcting a junior. In our way, duels between warriors aren't about winners and losers. They're about the exchange of skill. Doom took a step back and drove his longsword into the ground. He didn't want to fight again and deepen this widening rift of misunderstanding. His face was apologetic, his heart heavy with regret. In his bouts with the Destroyer warriors and the Night Watch, combats had always been friendly and ceremonial, a habit he'd long been used to. The easy equality he expected with his brother and the happiness of their reunion had made him overlook the cultural chasm between their worlds. Nur and Chemos were two different civilizations. Doom had been shaped by Nur's customs and by the Night Watch's spirit of mutual respect, so nothing he'd done had seemed improper. Fugen, however, came from Chemos, an industrial world he had conquered and where he was revered. Now Fugen was using the edge of his sword not merely as a weapon, but as a means of slowly tearing away at his brother's pride. "Pick up that sword and finish me," Fulgrim said, his voice rising despite himself. There was a pleading note in it, and his eyes shone. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Pride still held him. "Chemos has no warrior culture," he went on, "but in a duel there must be a victor and a vanquished, even if it means killing your opponent. Going all out is the greatest respect two warriors can give one another." He raised the sword and pointed it straight at Doom. The hand that held the blade trembled. Pain sat on the Primarch like a weight. His immaculate posture had slipped. His once lustrous hair looked dull, as if he'd been aged a lifetime in an instant. The stares from the crowd were like knives in his back, and, for the first time, the beautiful Chemosian seemed genuinely chilled to the bone. Doom opened his mouth as if to answer, then closed it. He said nothing. He only tightened his grip on the hilt of the sword at his side, his face full of apology. A duel between brothers, driven to this point by everything that set them apart. It had come to an end, and one of them understood what he had to do to spare the other further suffering. "Forgive me, Fugen." His voice tightened. The apology was all he could offer. "My brother." Those blunt, regretful words drew an almost bitter smile from Fulgrim. "Let me see the power of the Warrior King," he said, as if testing fate. The duel had been grueling and humbling. Fulgrim had felt, in every exchange, the distance between himself and his opponent, between himself and Doom, his brother Fugen. Victory was no longer the point. What mattered now was how he would accept defeat. With dignity, without cowardice. He straightened his grip on the sword. His hand no longer trembled. He let calm return to his face and met his brother's next move head-on. "Proud men do not fear failure," his brother declared. His expression was grave. With practiced courtesy, he performed the ritual of combat. The tip of his longsword came to rest on the ground, leveled toward Fulgrim. "Failure is temporary," he continued. "A truly proud man meets defeat, gathers himself, and rises again." He spoke slowly then, to erase any lingering misunderstanding between them. "This duel follows the warrior's ritual. The outcome you spoke of will stand." He softened his voice for the last time, addressing him as kin rather than rival. "My dear brother Fugen, remember, failure is temporary." There was a long, taut silence. Then in that held breath between blades the word came, an ending and a beginning all at once. "Now, You must meet me with all due solemnity and accept a short defeat." The crowd craned forward as the duel escalated, every eye fixed on the arena. The scions of the Destroyer Legion were in a class by themselves, far beyond ordinary Space Marines. A Space Marine's strength flowed from the gene seed of his gene father, which in turn reflected the Primarch's own power. The Custodes watched in absolute stillness, afraid to miss a single moment. The Custodes had overseen the creation of the Destroyer warriors from the beginning. They therefore knew better than anyone that those who survived the trials possessed terrifying mental fortitude and bodies that could rival or even surpass their own. All of that strength originated in the gift of the gene seed. At the root of it all was one question no one could answer. How powerful must the Primarch be? Doom Novik, gene father of the 21st Legion. Everyone wanted to know. The Emperor and the other great powers were no different. The four mightiest beings in attendance leaned forward as one, spellbound by the Warrior King's bearing. "Forgive my roughness," the Warrior King growled. With that low roar, he sprang into motion, launching a full strike. The Warrior King, Doom, raised his longsword and drove it toward his Primarch brother. Fulgrim's purple eyes narrowed. For a heartbeat, everything blurred. Doom moved far faster than he ever had before. As a Primarch, Fulgrim could read movement, but there was no time for thought. A raw, instinctive alarm surged through him, and he flicked his own longsword up to meet the blow. Doom's face betrayed nothing. He brought his blade down in a single brutal arc with his right hand, and Fulgrim, as expected, met it. The impact compressed the air with such force that it detonated outward. The Warrior King's momentum went from full speed to an instant stop, and the collision sent a concussive shockwave rippling through the arena. Stones splintered beneath them, chunks of the floor exploded outward like shrapnel and slammed into the rows of onlookers. None of the spectators noticed the debris. They were glued to the center of the arena, eyes fixed on the two brothers locked in that catastrophic clash. Doom's right hand froze in midair. Fulgrim's upward-sweeping longsword met the blade in that halted hand with a single, ringing clash. It should have driven Doom's guard back, but it didn't move an inch. Fulgrim's phoenix-like eyes went wide with disbelief. The scene seemed to mock the laws of physics. Sparks sprayed from the contact, and the force of the impact snapped the sword in his hand back hard enough to slice the web between his thumb and forefinger, blood welling immediately. Doom's blade remained immovable, like a pillar rooted to the earth. Before Fulgrim could react, his enhanced perception registered the left fist already coming for him. A muffled thud followed as Doom's punch slammed into Fulgrim's abdomen. The blow tore open Fulgrim's ornate purple robe, exposing his chest to the sunlight, and a visible ripple of concussive force radiated from the impact. Doom had deliberately held back some of his strength, but even so, the strike drove the wind from Fulgrim and left him reeling. The blow hit his nervous system like a hammer. A blinding pain stabbed through his abdomen. His eyes rolled back, and his breath came in ragged gasps. His stomach muscles convulsed so violently he doubled over. Acid and bile churned up his throat. Powerlessness swept through him, and his body went into automatic protection. Fulgrim's knees collapsed. He lost all strength and vomited. Green bile spurted from his mouth and nose as his nerves fired in chaotic spasms. A normal man, or even a space marine, would have been finished by that strike. Fulgrim was no normal man. He was a Primarch, a war engine forged by the Emperor. In the next instant, his expression snapped hard. His superhuman mind crushed the pain down. He focused every ounce of will, seized the longsword as it began to slip from his grasp, and instinctively drove it forward with all his might. Doom frowned, a flicker of helplessness in his eyes. Fulgrim was too proud to be humiliated. Doom respected him too much for that, so he restrained himself even as the fight continued. He moved faster, a blur, and slipped past Fulgrim's attack. His left hand opened from a fist into a flat palm and drove into Fulgrim's collarbone like a blade. There was a sharp crack. The bone dislocated, and Fulgrim's sword arm went suddenly limp. He refused to yield, though, clenching his other hand into a fist and swinging at Doom. Doom shook his head and steadied his body, bracing his right forearm with his left. He brought his right hand down in a precise chop against Fulgrim's collarbone again to stop any further use of the arm. Then, sliding his left hand down to cradle his brother and keep him from collapsing, he brought his right hand like a knife to the hip and thigh, two surgical strikes that hit major nerves and robbed Fulgrim of the ability to fight back. When it was done, Doom turned and smoothly supported his brother, holding him up. "Don't struggle," Doom whispered in his brother's ear. "Failure is temporary. Don't let yourself be defeated without dignity." Fulgrim stopped fighting and sagged against his shoulder, a helpless, bitter smile twisting his lips. "I must look awful, don't I? I shouldn't have challenged you." Doom studied him for a long moment. "There is a kind of poignant beauty here, one that makes you feel pity." He tore a strip from his purple robe and wiped the dirt from Fulgrim's mouth and nose. "That's better." Chapter 173, Warrior King. The duel between the Primarchs was over as quickly as it had begun. The crowd held back their cheers. No one dared praise one brother without risking offense to the other and their legions. They swallowed their excitement and watched in tense silence as the two measured one another's strength. Ferris felt neither triumph nor humiliation. When it ended, he dropped from the stands into the arena and spread his arms, signaling Doom to hand Fulgrim to him. Doom, far taller, looked awkward as he stooped to support the injured Primarch. "I'll never spar with a brother again," he muttered, remorse heavy in his voice, and carefully shifted Fulgrim into Ferris's hold. Fulgrim's injuries were not only physical, something in him was wounded deeper. Ferris hoisted him onto his back and, catching Doom's ashamed expression, softened his voice to reassure him. "This isn't your fault. Cultural differences." "This is a lesson worth remembering," someone observed quietly. "But it wasn't intentional on your part," another voice added. "Don't beat yourself up over it." "My powerful brother," Fulgrim murmured. The Primarch's healing was prodigious. Color returned to his face almost immediately. "It's not your fault," he said in that same mellifluous voice that always seemed to enchant. There was a soft crack as his torso tensed and his muscles snapped his right collarbone back into place. The numbness in his legs faded. Gently disentangling himself from Ferris's support, he pushed to his feet with stubborn grace and lifted his right hand to touch the collarbone. "I've had a lot of time to think," he said, calming himself. His handsome features brightened once more. "Since we came back to Terra, being the Emperor's children has gone to my head. The attention and glory, far more than anything I knew on Chemos, intoxicated me. I forgot myself." He turned toward Doom, calling him by the title the man wore like armor. "Warrior King, before I saw your strength, I confess I thought of taking that honor for myself, to add another hue to my own aura." Unfortunately, Fulgrim's expression sobered as he met Doom's eyes. "The honor's owner deserves it." He immediately shook his head. No, I've got that backward." "A title should be worthy of its bearer," Fulgrim said. "It's only a name." Doom sounded indifferent. Titles among the Night Watch were passed down by custom and rumor until they simply stuck. He didn't care for ceremony. Fulgrim brushed a stray white lock from his brow and looked at him with unusual seriousness. "I am grateful to you. You showed me true power, and you helped me curb an old vanity." Doom considered that for a moment, then nodded. "A warrior king isn't just a title. It's the recognition of everyone around you. I accept that honor." Fulgrim moved to Doom's side, took his brother's arm, and let his sharp gaze sweep over the arena. "Let us cheer!" His voice carried like a command. The spectators straightened instinctively, compelled by the Primarch's call. Fulgrim raised Doom's arm high. "Warrior King Doom Novik!" He shouted his brother's name until it rang through the stands. "Warrior King!" The crowd answered, their long-suppressed excitement igniting as thousands of voices rose in raw, thunderous cheer. "Doom Novik!" Ferris seized Doom's forearm, hauled him up, and bellowed, "Warrior King!" Two brothers, one on either side, lifted Doom's hands higher so he faced the crowd and could receive the honor. "Warrior King," came the answer. "Warrior King." The mortals were hoarse, shouting until their voices threatened to fail, desperate not to be drowned out by the custodes and space marines. Even the custodes and Astartes joined in, acclaiming the Primarch. Such a formidable son of the Emperor seemed to deserve no other title. The arena thrummed with the cry of a single name, an almost tangible adulation. Doom forced a smile as his brothers steadied him and slowly turned him to take in the gathered multitude, accepting their praise. Brotherly love and respect. A heartening sight, Malkador murmured, moved. The Emperor said nothing, only watched with a faint smile. Doom's strength pleased him. A warrior like this would be vital in the struggle against the Chaos Gods and their servants. The Emperor rose slowly, a satisfied light in his eyes, and turned to leave the arena. As his figure receded, his voice slipped into their minds and startled both Malkador and Valdor. He didn't seem to use his full strength. They exchanged a quick look, then shifted their gaze to the figure standing in the center of the sand, hands held high. A Primarch had felled his brother in seconds, and supposedly hadn't even been trying. Malkador nodded, a small satisfaction warring with the cloudiness in his eyes. In that instant, the immortal finally understood what his old friend had meant by hope. Perhaps this child really could stand against the Chaos Gods. "Let's go, Valdor," he said, smiling. "There's still work to do." Valdor, spear of the Emperor in hand, studied Doom with a grave expression for a long moment, then turned and followed the Emperor's retreating form. No one could say what he was thinking. The martial spectacle closed with the Primarch's departure, and the three brothers exchanged their farewells. Fulgrim had gone to the Emperor's children's base to drill his sons in swordsmanship and tighten the regimen of the Legion. Impatient for action, he felt the Great Crusade's ultimate glory looming and could not wait to take his place within it. Ferris, by contrast, was calm and methodical, but he too hungered for distinction. With eager determination, he traveled to the moon, where his legion was undergoing cultural integration, and where his new battleship, the Gloriana Queen, was being constructed. Ferris personally supervised the work. The Gloriana Queen he designed reflected the severe, machine-forged aesthetic of Medusa. Doom put to sea as well, leading the First Fleet away from Terra toward the Forge World Shauna. A vast army was gathering there, ready to receive his counsel for the coming strike against the Rangdan xenomorphs. What Doom did not know was that something unexpected had already happened on Shauna. On the Forge World itself, the ancient and mighty First Legion was assembling. At Terra's command, the Legion had immediately withdrawn from the Great Crusade and arrived at Shauna in succession, massing where the fate of the coming campaign would be decided. 3 Gloriana Queen battleships rode at anchor in the Forge World spaceport like iron citadels, their hulls throwing long shadows across the docks. Their presence alone was a statement, the First Legion in full display. Beyond them, over 100 capital ships and a host of smaller vessels had gathered, nearly 1,000 warships in all, at the designated rendezvous point. Aboard one of those Gloriana Queens, Grandmaster Urian Bendigard paced the length of his cabin, restless. He had only recently taken the mantle of Grand Master as the result of an uneasy internal compromise. Born on Terra and hardened in the Unification Wars, Urian was one of the Legion's old hands. Age and experience had carried him to leadership. His immediate charge was a precarious one, to bind the Legion together before it splintered. The First Legion was the eldest son, vast, storied, and proud. That legacy cut both ways. Its seniority bred arrogance. The Legion regarded itself as the standard by which all others should be judged. During the Great Crusade, it had pursued glory relentlessly, taking human domains and Xenos worlds with equal ruthlessness. The price had been steep, but the Legion's command had little patience for dissent. Preserving the supreme honor of being first mattered above all. That dogged ambition had exacted its cost. In the Legion's recent campaigns, the losses had been severe, and among them was Hector Seron, the former Grand Master who had fallen in battle. Urian could not forget that, nor could he ignore the fragile tethers that now held the First Legion together. After the Grand Master's death, the Legion unraveled into infig, ting. Brothers slandered and schemed against one another until the command structure was a tangle of rivalries. In the end, after long negotiations and countless compromises, the opposing factions settled on a compromise candidate, Urian. He had no noble lineage, no powerful patron, and belonged to no faction, precisely why all sides could accept him as Grand Master. What confronted him was a wreck, a divided Legion in desperate need of a unifying purpose. Urian hunted for an opportunity to bring them back together, and that opportunity arrived on the edges of the First Legion's operations. The Rangdan threat was vast and immediate. Only a united First Legion could hope to repel the Xenos' onslaught. There was a catch. The campaign's central figure would not be the First Legion. Terra had ordered that the Destroyer Warrior Primarch, Lord of the 21st Legion, a son of the Emperor, would personally take command. Urien felt a bitter resistance at the thought. He wanted the chance to stitch his legion back together under its own banner, not to watch a Primarch sweep in and take the glory. Still, the Emperor's will was absolute. He could not refuse Terra's orders. Grandmaster? The cabin door slid open. A warrior in black power armor stepped inside and did not remove his helmet. The visor hid his face, and the whole figure seemed wrapped in shadow. An inscrutable presence that only deepened the weight of the orders Urien had just received. "Who are you?" Urien asked, wary, his hand sliding to his hip as if to rest on the grip of his plasma pistol. "I didn't summon anyone. I'm a keeper of secrets." The man gave no name. He simply set a small iron box into Urien's outstretched hands, a relic entrusted to me by the former Grand Master. He told me that if anything arose concerning the 21st Legion, I was to deliver it to the next Grand Master. I believe that time has come. Without waiting for a response, the stranger stepped past Urien, laid the box on the long table, and turned to leave with the same calm, effortless certainty with which he had arrived. Urien watched him go, then moved forward, frowning. The box was small and heavy, its surface etched with a worn personal sigil. Urien's eyes widened as he recognized the mark, Hector Seron's. The former Grand Master's relic. Chapter 176. A Crazy Plan, thanks to Bauget for the tip. Urien stared at the small box that had once belonged to the former Grand Master and felt a cold premonition settle over him. Something about it tugged at the edges of his memory. Did this concern the 21st Legion? He hesitated to open it. His thoughts drifted back to the tangled history between the First Legion and the Last Sons, and as he sifted through the years, an old memory snapped into focus. Decades ago, he had clashed with Li Tang, the firstborn of the 21st Legion. They had never fully resolved whatever had passed between them. Instead, the former Grand Master had cut the matter off with a single order. Let the Primarch decide. The words echoed now, growing clearer in Urien's mind. The Grand Master's warning and that unresolved affair both returned to him with uncomfortable clarity. The box sat on the table like a mute reminder of promises unkept and secrets left unspoken. Urien reached out as if to lift the lid, then froze. Whatever lay inside was not merely information. To learn it would be to accept whatever obligations, debts, or dangers the Grand Master had hidden away. Whether it led to good or ill, the burden would fall on the one who knew. He drew his hand back, caught between the need to know and the weight of responsibility that knowledge would bring. After a moment's hesitation, Urien steadied himself and finally took the iron box. He sat, carefully eased the lid open, and found a narrow strip of parchment affixed to the inside. He peeled it free, and the first line hit him like a physical blow. "I have committed a great sin, a grave sin I cannot bear." The words, written in cramped High Gothic, carried the weight of unbearable remorse. Beneath that first sentence, the author continued, "This concerns the honor and disgrace of the Legion. I should have buried all of this, but I am a member of the First Legion and must ensure this matter is accounted for. Hector Seron." The strip was thin and short, its edge stained with water. Urien brought it to his face and inhaled. There was a faint, briny tang, the smell of tears. His two hearts hammered in his chest and beads of sweat gathered on his brow. He felt the old uncertainty rise again, but then forced it down. His duty as Grand Master demanded that he face secrets and darkness, however painful. Inside the iron box, beneath the parchment, lay the relic, a small holographic image. Urien's finger hovered for a heartbeat, then pressed it. The hologram sprang to life, projecting the gaunt face of Hector Seron as he had been in life. In the former Grand Master's recording, Seron's eyes were full of remorse as he laid out the whole story. When it finished, Urien felt the world tilt. His vision went dark at the edges, and he sank back into his chair. He was past crying. The First Legion lay in ruins, and Seron had left behind a yawning wreck. Let the Primarch decide. Urien's voice was low and hollow in the dim room. He could not make that judgment. All he could be was the keeper of the secret, waiting for the Primarch's return. Then, as if jolted by a sudden calculation, Urien sat bolt upright. A thin thread of madness sharpened his stern features. He saw a way to mend the breach between the legions and to pull the first back from the brink. His Astartes mind ran through permutations with inhuman speed. His eyes were rimmed faintly red. What if the First Legion struck on its own, took down the Xenos Randon before the Primarch arrived? If the 21st Legion could be presented with such a decisive victory, could it atone for the sins of the former Grand Master and bind the two legions together? The thought hung in the air like a blade, dangerous, tempting, and irreversible. He had insulted the 21st Legion, scorned its rights, and even spat blasphemies at its Primarch. That shame would be paid for in blood. The First Legion would offer victory as atonement, washed clean by the fervent steel of its warriors. Against all odds, the plan had a chance. They were on Whirlwind, and the Morse sector, a far-flung frontier of the Imperium, well beyond the Sol system. After a warp transit, the Primarch would not arrive for at least 4 Terran months. 4 months. Was that enough time to take down Randon? The mad scheme weaving through Urian's mind began to lock with the Legion's capabilities, and his hunger for battle flared hotter. 1 million Imperial auxiliary troops, the Forge World's cult Mechanicus, a mighty Titan Legion, 3 Gloriana Queen battleships, 100 capital ships, 1,000 assorted warships. Such a force was terrifying, enough to make the stars themselves tremble. Urian Bendegard sat upright and opened a secure channel. "Request the 10 Lords of the Heavenly Host to assemble for urgent council," he ordered. The 10 Lords of the Heavenly Host. The Heavenly Hosts were an ancient formation of the First Legion, a military institution that traced its lineage back to the unification wars of Terra. Each host embodied a distinct tactical doctrine and specialized in a different facet of warfare. In time, the hosts became the templates other legions measured themselves against. They were devastatingly powerful, led by the 10 Lords of the Heavenly Host who had carved victories and wrecked worlds across the stars. When the 10 Lords arrived as summoned, they stood before Urian like steel. The new Grand Master had called them together for the first time, and in the formal solemnity of the chamber, they granted him full, if reserved, respect. Urian felt it keenly, outward civility masking inner frictions. The lords took their places in precise, guarded ranks, barely speaking to one another. Urian rose and pushed forward a small, weathered reliquary, the relic of Hector Saren, until it rested at the center of the table. "Gentlemen," he said, voice steady, "you must swear to keep the contents of this secret." The lords exchanged puzzled glances, but out of respect for the office before them, and for the weight the relic represented, they gave the required oath and bound themselves to silence. Urian nodded once, satisfied, then activated the holoprojection and played Hector Saron's recorded legacy. When the image ended, faces around the chamber were unreadable. Surprise, tension, disbelief, anger, careful thought, doubt. The proud lords of the Heavenly Host, confronted with a horrifying secret that involved 2 great legions and a Primarch, were momentarily speechless. "Grand Master," said the Lord of the Crowned Heavenly Host, the oldest of the First Legion's contingents, its founding core, "you wouldn't have shown us this if you didn't have a plan. What is it?" Urian managed a brief smile, then went rigidly serious. "I have a plan, but I will need your cooperation." "State it," said the Lord of the Blade Heavenly Host, voice cool and precise. He spoke for the Legion's elite, its sharpest edge. Urian's brows drew together with a hard resolve. "We strike the Xenos before the Primarch arrives." "Are you mad?" erupted the Lord of the Bone Heavenly Host. He was, by nature, the most bloodthirsty and savage of them, and even he recoiled at the audacity of the proposal. He could see only a greater madness in the Grand Master's face. Urian met him evenly. "Yes, I am furious." Urian snapped, his eyes flushing with irritation until they were nearly red. The Grand Master's voice filled the chamber. "Look at this." He opened the holographic brief and a map bloomed in the air, alive with icons and numbers. Troop dispositions filled the projection. "These forces," he said, tapping the display, "combined with the First Legion. We strike first, smash the Xenos outposts, and then we retake the worlds they seized, swiftly." "Gentlemen," Urian continued, his gaze sweeping across the gathered lords of the Heavenly Host, "think about it. We deliver victory to the Primarch. We cleanse the stain of the First Legion's transgressions." His words landed like hammers. The plan was audacious, and it appealed to the ambitions of the lords. If it worked, the First Legion's glory would spread across the Imperium. A war that might have required the Primarch's direct intervention would instead be finished by the Legion. By seizing the initiative and dictating the tempo of the campaign, they could ensure that when the Primarch arrived, he would not be bringing battle plans. He would be greeted with victory. I don't think so. The objection cut through the murmurs. It came from the Lord of the Five-Pointed Heavenly Host, one of the Legion's psychers. His kind were few within the First Legion, but their power was extraordinary. He turned to the Grand Master and asked, "How do we get these armies to obey us?" "They're waiting for the Primarch," the Grand Master replied. "They want to fight at the side of the Emperor's son." The man raised two fingers, speaking very deliberately. "Secondly, Doom Novik is not Horus Lupercal." "Aye," another voice agreed. "That Primarch is incorruptible. He pulled the 19th Legion away from Horus and freed our brethren." "Grand Master," the first man said, "if we carry out your plan as it stands, I don't think Novik will approve. He'll scold us for our recklessness." The words of the Lord of the Five-Pointed Heavenly Host poured cold water on the room's fervor. Heads nodded. The enthusiasm that had filled the chamber cooled into careful thought. If Horus himself had stood here, such measures might have been welcomed, or even praised. But the Gene Father of the Destroyer Legion was known for his rectitude and fair judgment. "Then we'll vote," the Grand Master decided. "The minority will accept the majority. Once the vote is done, everyone must cooperate completely." Unable to reach consensus by debate, the Lords of the Heavenly Host finally resolved their differences by putting the matter to a vote, binding the Legion to a single, unified course of action. Urien offered one last reassurance to secure their support. "I can sort out the command structure for the combined forces. You can be confident on that point," he said. "The mortal contingents and the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Cult Mechanicus, will be brought into the fight and will attack alongside the Legion." At the Grand Master's words, the Lords of the Heavenly Host exchanged looks and then nodded. They agreed to decide the Legion's fate by vote. As the highest authority in the Legion, and in the absence of the Gene Father, they alone possessed the right to settle such critical matters, thanks to those who pointed out typos. The First Legion is about to pull off something major. Chapter 177, Seeking Command. If the Lords of the 10 Heavenly Hosts split their votes evenly, everything would be deadlocked. To prevent that, the Grand Master cast his ballot as well. 11 votes in all would decide the Legion's next move. Once the decision fell into place, the Space Marines, precise as war machines, moved with lethal speed. 7 votes favored the Grand Master's bold plan. 7 Lords of the Heavenly Host were willing to carry out his aggressive strategy. The First Legion had lain dormant too long, its command eager to rekindle the fighting spirit of their bewildered brothers with a decisive victory. Without the Grand Master's decisive vote, the Lords had already tilted toward action. 3 dissenting votes remained, the last vestiges of reason within the Legion, but they were not enough to stem the surge of fervor. Urien's stern, drawn face softened into a brief, almost satisfied smile for his Legion. "We shall be united," he declared. He turned to the 3 dissenters, his gaze as cold and slicing as a blade. "The minority obeys the majority," he said, leaving no room for argument. "The plan will be carried out, and there will be no more dissenting voices." It was a warning as much as an order. The 3 Lords of the Heavenly Host were expected to obey the Legion without question. "We will follow your plan." They knelt before the Grand Master, voices low and deferent. Urien nodded, satisfied. The looming external threat had forged a temporary truce among the hosts. With the fleet aiming for Randan, old grievances were forced aside. Outwardly united and aligned in purpose, the Legion's glory might yet be reforged. And Randan, the First Legion, was invincible. "How will you take command of the army?" asked the Lord of the Five-Pointed Heavenly Army. He wanted to know how the Grand Master intended to mobilize forces that belonged to a Primarch. That was the crux of the plan. Without a massive mortal force, it was all words. Urien lowered his voice and explained in a measured tone. "We'll disguise one of our ships as an alien vessel and slip into the rendezvous point. If there's even a risk of intelligence being leaked, the Legion will seize temporary command and launch a proactive strike against the aliens. You're insane. The Lord of the Five-Rayed Heavenly Army stared as if struck. You're prepared to fabricate military intelligence to force a battle, just to wash away the Legion's humiliation? Manufacture a false emergency to compel every force to join a preemptive assault on the aliens, the Grand Master said simply. Do you know what that would mean? The Lord could barely take it in. If we're found out, this won't be a local scandal. It will drag the entire Legion into disgrace. It will destroy the mortals' faith in the Astartes and tear the Legion's honor to pieces. The Emperor will not forgive us. The Gene Father will never approve. Around the chamber, the other lords of the heavenly host exchanged grim looks. A ripple of panic moved through even the most steadfast space marines. The Grand Master's plan teetered on the edge of madness, and his willingness to carry it out was worse still. He was gambling everything, the Legion's glory, the credibility of every Astartes, and his own future. Those who had originally approved the plan wavered now, hesitation flickering across their faces as some tried to speak against the escalating madness. That's if it's discovered, Urian snapped, his voice booming through the dim chamber and drowning out the objections. We'll do it cleanly, leave no trace. The Grand Master raised a hand and clenched his fist, his gauntleted knuckles cracked. He stepped up to the table and fixed each of them with a look. This will be the rendezvous point near the battlefield. Accidents can happen at any time. With a small measure, the Legion gains a legitimate reason to take command of the army, Urian pressed on. Think about it, brothers. His words were incendiary, setting their hunger for victory alight. The First Legion will lead a grand army, surge into the worlds the aliens occupy, and wipe them clean. The chroniclers will record the Legion's decisiveness, its ruthless, lightning counterattack against the invaders. The lords of the heavenly host pictured the scene and began to breathe faster, intoxicated by the vision of triumph as if victory were already within their grasp. Agreed. After a long debate, most of the Legion's high command finally accepted the Grand Master's plan. As he had insisted, if it was done cleanly, no one would notice. We will prepare and get the heavenly host ready for battle, he ordered. The dissenters slipped away, outnumbered and unable to reverse the decision. They left in silence. Though they loathed the plan, they still prepared for the coming conflict. I will keep a memorandum, said the Lord of the Five-Pointed Heavenly Host, staring at the Grand Master before he left, so I can give an account to the Gene Father later. You may, Urian replied impassively, but I expect you to keep it secret. I will not reveal a single detail of what transpired. With that, the Lord turned and departed. The secret meeting broke up, and the First Legion began to carry out the orders. In the fleet's manifest, one ship's records were expunged as if it had never existed in the order of battle. At the Grand Master's command, the vessel underwent extensive, clandestine modifications. Then, without fanfare, it slipped quietly out of the fleet and headed into the void. The silence at the rendezvous point shattered like glass. On the bridge of the Gloriana-class battleship Indomitable Truth, Grand Master Urian Bendegard stood with his hands behind his back, staring out through the viewport into a scatter of cold stars. He kept a running tally of time in his head, each second a small click toward whatever had been planned. Then the alarms began. First a high-pitched keening, then the Forge World's warning arrays flaring to life. The warp-warped hush was torn open as an alien battleship dropped out of the warp into real space. Unknown vessel entering the star system. Ship silhouette matches Randan vessel. The cogitator's mechanical voice announced the identification, and the phrase echoed through the fleet like a gauntlet thrown. It's here. Urian drew a thin breath. His chest tightened. The sight of that silhouette crystallized everything. A single heavily disguised battleship, masquerading as a Randan warship, was the spearhead of the Legion's move to seize command. Destroy the vessel immediately. Do not let them escape. Urian's order cut across the comms, rigid and raw. His voice, the voice of the Grand Master giving the attack order, carried the edge of panic he could not quite hide. Beneath the command, under the cold steel of authority, there was a smaller, sharper feeling, guilt. He knew what the disguise had meant. The mortal crew aboard the falsified ship were expendable, casualties of a plan that had started with deception. The thought of their sacrificed lives was a hard thing to swallow, even as he sent fleets to fire. The ship's communications were jammed, locked down so no outgoing signal could get through. The status report came again over the internal channels. Abomination Exemplar is engaging. Sensors confirmed that a Glory Queen-class battleship had taken the initiative and opened fire. At the rendezvous point, the fleet came to life. Engines flared, weapon mounts slew, and every warship began to maneuver into an encircling formation around the intruder. No one doubted the stakes. The alien battleship in the Shana system had to be destroyed before it could slip away. Grandmaster Urian remained on his command throne, face set and grim. "Connect me to the Archmagos of the Adeptus Mechanicus," he ordered. The holoscreen blossomed to life. A red-robed form floated into the chamber, the Archmago's presence all metal and ritual cloth. He cradled a gear axe, and the lower half of his face had been replaced by an external vocal array. His voice, when it came, carried the brittle chill of machinery. "Grand, Master Urian," he intoned. "I am aware of your intentions." One of the Archmago's bionic eyes unfolded data across the holo, streams of vector plots, sensor overlays, and probabilistic matrices rendered in harsh, clinical lines. "According to my calculations," he said, "the Imperial Army's assembly may already be compromised." The information blinked and recalculated with detached efficiency, the cold logic of a machine laying out the threat in stark, unfeeling numbers. "The current situation is extremely critical," the Archmagos said. "Yes." Urian seized the opening, echoing the urgency in the chamber. "Archmagos, we must strike first and seize the initiative. The Primarch will not arrive for some time. We cannot sit and wait while the aliens prepare for war. The fleet must take the offensive and deliver a swift, decisive blow." The Archmagos did not answer at once. He bowed his head as filaments of green data flowed across his optical lenses. Finally, he looked up, the data stream surging in his eyes, and fixed Urian with a cool, mechanical stare. "The data supports your conclusion." After a long pause, he added, "A preemptive strike is the best option. According to battlefield emergency regulations, Urian Bendigard, you now have command of the army." The cold, mechanical proclamation sounded like music to Urian's ears. He felt his fingers twitch and his heart race at the weight of the authority bestowed upon him. The fleet would obey, and even the Adeptus Mechanicus forces, the mortal auxiliary army, and the Titan Legion would answer to his command. He inclined his head in salute. "Thank you for your support, Archmagos. I will lead the fleet to the Morse star system and destroy the alien outpost." The Archmagos gave a single, measured nod and closed the holographic display. Urian let out a long breath. Behind the calm facade, his thoughts churned. He stared through the viewport at the glittering starfield. Below, the disguised battleship had been torn to pieces, flashes and fragments scattering like funeral fireworks, a macabre celebration of the plan's success. After a heartbeat of hollow exhilaration, Urian opened a covert channel and whispered, "Make sure the disguised battleship is completely destroyed. Leave no trace." "Understood?" came the reply, flat, efficient, devoid of feeling. For the operation to proceed without complication, Urian had chosen ruthlessness over mercy. He had just sacrificed tens of thousands of mortal crew members. Watching the wreckage, as though he could hear their cries over the roar of the explosion, the Grand Master swallowed his pity. He repeated the justification to himself like a litany. All sacrifices will eventually be rewarded. Chapter 178, Hearing of Past Grudges. Orders came in a blur, and the First Legion moved with a frightening efficiency that showcased their combat prowess. Yet beneath the speed and precision, several sharp-eyed observers felt wrongness in the air. It all looked too tidy, too prepared. The Xenos vessel had appeared with uncanny timing, slipping into the star system already inside the First Legion's effective range. There was only one ship, an intrusion that looked deliberate, as if it had been baited to appear at that exact point. The way the Legion opened fire only deepened suspicions. Their volleys were not merely sufficient to disable or capture, they were meant to erase. The warship was atomized with an intensity that suggested more than battlefield ruthlessness, something to be destroyed and buried so no trace remained. Taken together, the timing, the single target, the obliterating force, the whole operation felt staged. Even so, no one dared to speak openly. The mortal officers swallowed their doubts and fell in line. They boarded their transports, followed the Astartes out, and obediently led their legions into the campaign, to conquer worlds and cleanse them of the unclean Xenos, whatever the cost or the secret behind that one, too perfect encounter. The Adeptus Mechanicus fell into line. Skitarii streamed aboard troop transports, servo arms and cogitators humming. Titan war machines were marshaled into their colossal transport hulls. The Imperium's population numbered in the trillions, and every soldier conscripted into the mortal auxiliary army was an elite, hand-picked from countless worlds. The mortals elevated to senior command were rarer still, 1 in a million. The Mechanicus was no exception. Each Archmagos occupied the triple mantle of Forge Master, Grand Strategist, and High Official. They had likely suspected irregularities for some time, but they kept their counsel and watched the situation unfold. No one voiced objections or dared obstruct the operation. The specter of what if smothered every rising doubt. What if Xenos had already penetrated the rendezvous, seen the massed Imperial forces and carried word back to their homeworld? To sit idle when such a risk existed would be dereliction of duty to the Emperor. And besides, the First Legion's bold, preemptive posture resonated with the leaders of many other factions, giving them cause to follow rather than hesitate. When something goes wrong, someone always has to take the blame, and in this case, it suited the Astartes to shoulder it. As an old Terra proverb has it, when the sky falls, the tall ones hold it up. The First Legion were those tall ones. Their actions fell squarely under the emergency war regulations, and the rest of the army, swept up in the Legion's momentum, joined the campaign to eradicate the Rangdan. Send an astropathic message to the Primarch. Everything we have done complies with Imperial law, Urien ordered. He had pulled them all into this maelstrom with a bold, dangerous plan, but an undercurrent of unease still nagged at him. The Emperor's son from Terra, the Primarch of the 21st Legion, must be informed. Frontline operations required reporting to the highest commander of the army, and the legality of the maneuver had to be explained. The astropathic choir received the order. In the ship's dedicated chamber, they formed around the main speaker and sang the transmission into the warp, the subtle harmonics carrying Urien's words to distant ears. When the choir fell silent, Urien allowed himself a brief, measured breath. He settled into the command throne, his eyes flashing with cold light, and bent all his focus back to planning the next moves of the campaign. To unite the Legion, Urien had lied to everyone, even risked offending the Primarch. The First Legion had to win, no matter the cost. The thought of failure was unbearable. If he failed, how could he face the Primarch? How could he face those who had sacrificed themselves for his reckless plan? Under the First Legion's coordination, the forces Compliath aided boarding. Warships slipped out of the port and into the warp. The fleet laid course for the Morse star system, running straight for the Xenos outpost. Far from real space, an astropathic communique raced through the warp toward the royal fold. Astropathic messages did not travel like ordinary transmissions. They came wrapped in images, poems, riddles, and allegory. The astropaths in the Primarch's chamber received the signal and set to work peeling away the metaphors until the true meaning lay bare. The result stunned them. No one delayed. An astropath went at once to the Primarch's chamber and presented the decoded message. A Xenos vessel has intruded into the Shana star system. To prevent any intelligence leaks, Sophia reported, the current Grand Master of the First Legion, Urien Bendigard, activated emergency protocols and launched a preemptive strike on the Xenos. When Sophia finished, Doom's eyebrows shot up. He looked unpleasant. Does he take me for a fool? The Primarch's voice was low, almost measured, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. A charged silence filled the bridge. Everyone went to one knee and bowed their heads, not daring to speak. Even the hovering Iron Man drifted lower, its servos whispering, "Rise." Doom breathed the word, immediately aware of his lapse, and raised a hand for them to stand. "This has nothing to do with you." He fixed his gaze on the report. Grandmaster Urien Bendigard? He narrowed his eyes. He had better not screw this up. Doom had heard of the First Legion long before now. They were the oldest of the legions, the first organized force forged by the Emperor, and they carried an almost unbearable weight of ancient glory. Pride was built into their bones. Where other legions dealt with stubborn worlds through negotiation and subtlety, the first acted without distinction. Human or Xenos, ally or enemy, all met the same uncompromising hand. Their victories were carved with equal ferocity across friend and foe alike. They used violence on everyone, those who surrendered and those who fought back. Conquest through brutality had become the First Legion's way, and they left fractured worlds in their wake. On the bridge, Doom's voice cut through the low hum of machinery. He was speaking to the empty air, but his words were meant for Navigator Francisca. He could not shake the dark premonition that the upcoming operation against the Rangdan would cost them dearly, thanks to the First Legion's recklessness. Reselect course. Proceed directly to the Morse star system, he ordered. Francisca's soft reply answered from the console. Course reselected, plotting direct route to the Morse star system. The holographic display shimmered as the new trajectory unfurled. Sophia distributed the fleet orders over the quantum channels. All vessels, close formation around the flagship, proceed to the new destination. Doom looked at the blue projection of his loyal aide. Sophia, he said, 3 days before we reach the system, have all combat units prepare. He had to be ready to clean up whatever mess the First Legion left behind. Sophia inclined her projection in a precise, formal bow and logged the command. Understood. After finishing his orders, Doom left the bridge and went down to the training deck to oversee the destroyer warriors. 6 years in the regular time stream had swelled the destroyer legion to 400. Nur had originally contributed 150. Another 200 were sent later, and after training, they were parceled out to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th fleets. The final 50 newly adapted recruits from Terra had been taken under Doom's personal supervision and brought to the front lines to fill the high-end combat roles. On the Royal Majesty's training deck, golden light washed over the scene. 1,000 custodian guards, unburdened by the constant strain of Terra, lolled about and chatted on the exercise field, completely at ease. For the golden-armored warriors, leaving Terra had felt like a holiday. In their downtime, many came to the deck simply to watch the Primarch instruct the destroyer warriors. Doom himself paused on the observation platform, stopping short of the training ground. He did not move closer. Without turning, he asked Ra, who stood behind him, "Ra, do you have anything to say?" A moment before, when word of the First Legion's movements had reached the fleet, Ra's psychic link had registered a sudden surge of emotion, and that ripple still hung between them. Doom didn't think it was a coincidence. The destroyer warriors were not given to sudden displays of feeling. Their emotions were steady, controlled. At that time, you had not yet returned, and the Legion was only taking shape, Ra said. As one of the original destroyer warriors, he knew the history intimately. His voice was clear, edged with a restrained enthusiasm as he explained slowly to his gene-father. The eldest son once had a falling out with Hector Saron, who was then Grand Master of the First Legion. What exactly happened, we do not know, Ra added. Both men deliberately avoided speaking about it. Doom stared at the faint, shimmering golden light and murmured the name he had been hearing in his head. Li Tang? He had combed the Legion records himself and found no mention of any such incident. Ra nodded, standing as rigid as ever. It was not intentionally hidden from you, he said. Because of the special and sensitive nature of the matter, it was not entered into the Legion archives. Sophia materialized at Doom's side, bowing with quiet efficiency. "Shall I send an astropathic inquiry to Lord Li Tang, my lord?" she asked. "No need," Doom said, shaking his head. "Don't bother him. I'll know when the time is right." "Understood." Sophia stepped back and dissolved into motes of light. A cold certainty settled in Doom's chest. That earlier clash had almost certainly been a catalyst for everything that followed. Hector Saron was already dead, cut down fighting Xenos, and the Council of War's records confirmed the First Legion had suffered devastating losses in that engagement. Perhaps the Grandmaster's successor had gone into battle to prove something to himself. Doom turned and strode toward the training grounds. The truth would become clear once they reached the front. For now, there was work to do. Marshal the forces, prepare for war, and steel themselves for the brutal fighting ahead. Chapter 179. Ugly and Vicious Things. The fleet punched back through the warp and snapped into real space. 1,000 engine glows scattered across the void. From the surface of Morse world, it looked as if a new constellation had been born. They had come to the Morse star system, bearing humanity's wrath, intent on bringing destruction to the hated Xenos. On the bridge of the indomitable truth, the auger arrays were already running at full power. A torrent of sensor data poured in, mapped and replayed in real time across the displays. The reports were plain. Morse was rich, a proper star, a habitable world, and several mineral-heavy planets, and it had been turned into a fortress. Every orbit was crowded with defensive platforms. The empty spaces between worlds bristled with ambush fields and fire traps, and beneath the surface, the density of concealed emplacements was even greater. Fleet spread out and formed battle formation. Urian ordered without hesitation, issuing the first of a cascade of commands to disperse the force and assume standard combat procedures. The Imperium's fleet at anchor was a veteran armada, battle-hardened ships and seasoned captains who needed only a single order to move. At Urian's command, the squadrons fanned out, widening the gaps between vessels and slipping into a disciplined battle formation against the blackness of space. Grand Master, incoming transmission, the communications officer reported, turning to await orders. Patch it through, Urian said, standing ramrod straight. A holographic projection blossomed in the command center. The image on the holoscreen changed the Grand Master's face. His composure snapped into fury. Traitor, he spat, teeth bared. You have abandoned human dignity to grovel as an alien's lackey. The projection showed a human, clad in simple rags, an ignoble sight that confirmed the worst of the Fifth Legion's intelligence. The Randan Xenos employed psionic methods to bend humans to their will. Confronted with one of his own in thrall to the enemy, Urian's contempt and anger were impossible to hide. The holographic image flickered to life. A gaunt human filled the projector, his face twisted with fury as he spat a warning at the Grand Master. "Human, get out of here!" he snarled. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, his expression softened into a submissive, reverent mask. "This place belongs to my lord," he said in a low, obedient tone. The Grand Master's reply was cold and absolute. He straightened, voice hard as iron. "Tell your master we come bearing destruction. We will wipe them out. A war of extermination." The captive bowed so low his forehead neared the floor, eyes shining with fanatical devotion. "My lord has conquered hundreds of human worlds," he intoned. "You will be the same. Their will bend to yours." "Hopeless," the Grand Master said, shaking his head with contempt. He looked at the human collaborator as if beholding a parasite. "Tell them to prepare their necks and wait for humanity's slaughter." Without waiting for any reply, the Grand Master cut the feed. The enslaved human's curses were still dying on his lips when the link went dark. "Order the fleet to attack without restraint," the Grand Master commanded. Urian felt a tightness ease in his chest. In his view, humans who had sold themselves to the Xenos could only be cleansed by fire, and now that fire had been ordered. Humans controlled by Xenos are no longer our kin. They have no free will and are nothing more than the Xenos' loyal tools. The Grand Master swallowed his fury. His eyes narrowed, his hands clenched for a heartbeat. Then, as if steeling himself, his tension eased. This was a war without mercy, and the First Legion had no shortage of ruthless methods to use against the Xenos. "Understood," the Lord of the Heavenly Host answered, and both leaders put their fleets into motion. The Imperium's battleships surged into the void, determined to purge the xeno-contamination from the star system. 3 Gloriana-class battleships formed the heart of the force. From Hem the fleet split into 3 main strike groups and a dozen smaller task forces, striking simultaneously from multiple vectors. Cruising constantly through the black, the Imperium's elite squadrons cut an intimidating figure. They lacked the Nerf fleet's precise analytical calculations, but their combat instincts were honed by decades of war, more than enough to press the advantage. As the human battleships pressed forward, they met the first wave of Xeno defensive platforms head-on. The Randan tech proved formidable. Their energy lances and similar weapons delivered outputs on par with the Imperial batteries, and the opening exchanges were brutal. Still, the Imperium's ships held formation and kept advancing. their volleys answering the Xenos strikes as the battle for control of the system began in earnest. The engagement was evenly matched. There was no technological gap. The stationary defense platforms, by virtue of their mass, carried heavier guns and thicker shields. A few well-placed volleys could overload a battleship's void screens. The Imperial fleet was not foolish enough to stand and trade broadsides. Battle groups kept constant internal comms, using their mobility to rotate which ships absorbed the platform's fire. So the two forces settled into a long-range artillery duel. Lance arrays and macro cannons thundered in concert. Augers locked onto targets, divination arrays churned through variables, and firing sequences were timed to the microsecond. Blazing lance bolts scissored the void while ship thralls worked in synchrony, ramming massive macro cannon shells into their acceleration chambers. Plasma and lance fire streaked outward, and macro shells, accelerated to 1/10 of light speed, hammered the platform shields. The fleet was fully deployed against its assigned targets. On the surface, the situation looked excellent. The Abomination Exemplar, the Indomitable Truth, and the Truth Razor drove like 3 drawn blades into the heart of the system. The Indomitable Truth pushed hardest, angling straight for the Xenos' lair in the Morse system, Morse world. Grandmaster Urian felt his vigilance loosen. The Xenos were dangerous, to be sure, but the Imperium's main fleet still held an overwhelming advantage. He began to lower his guard and sketch plans for a landing when an anomaly flickered on the comms. "Grandmaster, Xeno battleships have appeared behind us." The mortal captain's voice came through urgent and ragged with fear. Urian, an Astartes forged by the Emperor, long accustomed to the panics of mortal men, might have dismissed the alarm, but he snapped to the tactical holoscreen. What filled the display made him involuntarily catch his breath. A vast warship, obscene and malformed, loomed where there had been nothing moments before. It was a thing of ugliness and revulsion, a design that offended every rule of sane construction. Only then did Urian realize that the intelligence the Fifth Legion had brought in might be no more than the tip of the Randon iceberg. The battleships the Fifth Legion had landed were human vessels, servant ships built in the style of the Imperium. But the true Xeno battleships were now appearing in the void, blasphemous, terrifying things that seemed wrong on a fundamental level. These had to be the real Randon Xenos. One of them stretched like a great ribbon across the emptiness, a 10-kilometer hull the color of gray-brown rot, hulking and whale-like. Where its scaled armor gaped there leaked a fluorescent green ichor. Worm-like organs slithered and inhaled in the seams as the plates opened and closed. From above it was almost conventional, the upper deck armored in a pattern humans could recognize as armor. The lower half, however, was nauseating. It violated every sense of human proportion and taste. A single look bred disgust. Masses of raw biological hull tissue and glistening connective sinew, wrapped and braided around writhing energy conduits, like diseased pale intestines spotted with mold. Long, fibrous tendrils trailed from the belly of the ship. As the vessel Powe read up those dense, living conduits, writhed, fluorescent green streams of energy coursing through them with a slow, repulsive pulse. The battleship's superstructure was sickening, a swollen, pulsating mass that looked like a giant brain, veined with dense red tissue. Along the hull's flanks were clusters of wrinkled, circular orifices, holes the Grandmaster immediately recognized as gun ports. At the bow jutted a bone-like ram, its surface scaly and grotesque. Despite the biological skin, the ship's engines were unmistakably mechanical, steel housings and roaring plasma afterburners tearing the void. Biotech on the outside, metal and machine as a skeleton, the hateful vessel embodied a terrifying fusion of disciplines. Its style was nothing like the purely mechanical defense platforms they knew. The Grandmaster suppressed his dismay and permitted the mortal captain his panic. What happened? He demanded of the Augur Array supervisor. Xeno battleships did not simply appear out of nowhere. The supervisor's fingers flew over the console. The Augur returned more and more blips. It wasn't a single intruder behind the fleet. There were contacts multiplying across the system. 20 Xeno battleships, the instruments confirmed, were now present in the star system. The crew's analysis finally explained the Xeno battleship's stealth. "Sir," the technician reported, "the Xeno ships are using a camouflage system to mask their emissions. The augurs can't detect them. Attack them, the Grandmaster ordered. He sent a probing wave to test the alien vessel's firepower. The fleet swung into action, peeling off enough battleships to engage the strange Xeno hulls. At long range, the two forces opened fire. Blue, high-energy clusters erupted from puckered, wrinkled apertures along the Xeno hulls, some kind of bioplasma cannon. Brain-like tissue nodules embedded in the enemy ships began to vibrate and discharge, sending lightning-like arcs at the Imperial Void shields. The shields flickered and then overloaded in seconds. Electrical whips lashed across the Imperial vessels. Ships struck by those arcs suffered engine instabilities, and their internal lights guttered and went dark. "Electromagnetic weapon attack!" someone on the bridge shouted as alarms began to scream. "It will drain our battleship's energy, leaving us completely defenseless." Static crackled over the comms as the first wave of ships engaging the Randan Xenos sent back urgent alarms. Battleships without shields were prey, and the Randan vessels wasted no time exploiting the weakness. Their shields held against the Imperial salvos while they concentrated fire on the unprotected hulls. Sparks and debris blossomed across the void. In the opening exchange with the Xenos, the human fleet paid the first and bitter price. Chapter 178. We are in big trouble. Despite the Imperium's clear numerical advantage, overconfidence and a too hasty advance handed the enemy the initiative and the first casualties. The Randan warships attacked in tight squadrons of 5. Their opening electromagnetic volleys slammed into Imperial Void shields and drove them past their limits. When the second wave struck, biological plasma cannons detonated along a destroyer's hull and disintegrated it in an instant. The Xenos fought with discipline and coordination, and their crews were every bit as skilled as the Imperium's. They compounded the insult with words. A sneering message crackled over the common channel. "Humans, slaves, kneel before us." The taunt was answered in kind. "Xeno mongrels, feel the wrath of humanity," came the Grandmaster's roar from the bridge of the Abomination Exemplar. Under the Grandmaster's command, the Gloriana-class battleship bore down into the engagement. At optimal range, her auger array lit up and locked on to the alien squadrons. Then, with all broadsides firing, the Abomination Exemplar unleashed hell. Macro cannons thundered, lance beams stitched bright scars through the void, and the battle that had begun with a humiliating blow for the Imperium flared into a furious, even contest. The Gloriana-class's macro cannons flared like suns, painting the void with blistering light. One salvo was enough. The terrifying firepower of the battleship overloaded the Xeno vessel's shields in an instant. Layers of the semi-organic hulls peeled away under the onslaught, living tissue vaporized, and searing ichor spat into the cold vacuum. The alien ships died as if they were organisms, heartbeats snuffed out, carcasses unraveling into drifting debris. When the main fleet reached the engagement zone, their concentrated guns made up for the technological differences, and the balance of battle tipped toward the Imperium. 20 Xeno vessels, after tearing into a few smaller Imperial escorts, were driven off by the capital ships, leaving more than 10 wrecked hulks behind. The survivors fled in disorder, but some slipped through the blockade. At astral ranges measured in astronomical units, an unfamiliar camouflage system rendered them invisible to both optics and electronic sensors. "Continue the attack," the Grandmaster barked. His fleet pressed on, tasked with smashing the defensive platforms and cleansing the void of whatever Xeno threat remained. Urian ordered every landing warship readied and sent them toward Morse World, preparing for a full planetary assault. His plan was straightforward: neutralize the Randan Void's strong points and clear the space around the system so the fleet could fight without restraint. If the First Legion crushed the Xeno ground forces on Morse World, the Randan would lose their foothold in the Morse star system and any hope of further expansion there. Humanity, in turn, would gain a staging point for an offensive deeper into Randan territory. Morse had become a strategic keystone. The First Legion had to take it. Auger's scans of Morse World showed surprisingly few planetary defenses. Once a human industrial planet, it had been stripped and reshaped by the Randan into a chaotic, resource-exhausted occupation. Urian frowned and nodded to himself. The thin defensive grid on the surface suggested the Xenos had leaned heavily on void-based defenses and left only minimal ground fortifications. "Commence the planetary assault," he ordered. "I will fight alongside you." His voice, as Grandmaster of the First Legion, was broadcast to the assembled landing fleet. He snapped his helmet into place and strode for the nearest boarding ramp to the waiting landing craft. Outside the planetary defense perimeter, the landing fleet shifted formation, angling the bellies of its warships toward Morse. 50,000 Space Marines of the First Legion had been mustered. 10,000 kept on orbital standby, the remaining 40,000 committed to the ground assault. Urian planned a lightning campaign, a crushing strike to wipe the wrenched Xenos from the planet before they could react. All 10 heavenly armies were committed. The ships opened 3 primary landing zones, while a 1,000,000-strong mortal auxiliary army poured from the transports. "Drop pods away," Urian ordered, his final command before leaving the bridge. Ventral launch bays yawned open in high orbit, and the first wave of Vanguard warriors launched in their pods. At 3 points across the globe, some 3,000 drop pods punched through the planetary shield and hurtled toward the surface. The Randan Xenos below had done little beyond activating the shield. They mounted no visible counterattack, as if resigned to their fate. The odd behavior briefly set some officers on edge, but confidence quickly returned. 40,000 Astartes were more than enough to take a single world, and no Xenos could stand against them. The drop pods hit the ground, and the warriors of the First Legion poured out onto the plain. In the distance, a hive city towered over the landscape. Its gates stood wide open, and a tide of humans was pouring from within. Ragged, emaciated beggars alongside factory workers and middle-class clerks, even silk-clad nobles, all mixed together, all marched like cattle. Not one of them moved of their own will. The Xenos had taken their minds. They carried crude automatic weapons and wore nothing more than torn rags and patched strips of scavenged armor over vital areas. They did not flee when they saw the Astartes. There was no fear in their faces, only the blind devotion of fanatic cultists. With 100,000 screams and war cries, the mass moved as one. The charge had begun, millions strong. The ground trembled and the air vibrated under their feet. Only the Astartes remained composed. "Establish a defensive line," the company captains barked. Their mission was the landing zone, and nothing would break it. The first bolter cracked, then another, then a rolling tide of fire. Bolter rounds stitched together into an iron curtain, cutting the screaming horde down in waves. Where the men surged, there was no mercy, only the unrelenting, disciplined slaughter of superhuman warriors. It was a massacre. At each of the planet's 3 landing zones, the same brutal tableau repeated. From the Hive City, fearless slave hordes poured out in a mad charge toward the Space Marines. The warriors of the First Legion snapped into position and answered with clinical slaughter. Bolter volleys punched through ranks of bodies, each round tearing through multiple figures before detonating amid the crush. Incendiary beams licked across the masses, turning flesh and clothing into smoking tangles and heaped, charred bone. Heavy weapons carried in the drop pods never ceased. Their sustained barrages smashed into the frenzied lines again and again. 1,000 drop pods had disgorged 4,000 Space Marines, forming an unrelenting curtain of fire. Discipline and timing were absolute. Movement and fire were synchronized, reloads ran like clockwork, and the slaughter did not pause. Servo skulls and auto-servitors kept the ammunition flowing from pod to gun without interruption. A red mist hung over the field. Torn limbs and organs from bolter detonations littered the ground and marked the Marines' path. Every yard gained was paid for in tens of thousands of lives. Ordinary human troops would have broken long before now under such a hellish meat grinder. But these were Randan slaves, mind-locked, expendable to the Xenos, and they kept coming. Wave after wave poured out of the Hive City and into the bolter fire, seemingly oblivious to the bodies collapsing around them, driven only by the command in their heads. At the outer limit of the Space Marines' range, one of the slaves' weapons barked. The shot did nothing. The black-armored warriors were untouched. Yet it meant everything. It proved, brutally and simply, that with enough bodies and a single, unbending purpose, the mortals could buy a path to the defensive line with their lives. As they closed, the Marines' shooting changed. They know Anger needed careful aim. There were too many of them, and the inevitability of numbers turned precision into waste. Any burst would find purchase eventually. Any hole could be sealed by another human body. The slave army surged on, auto weapons rattling, rounds chattering uselessly off power armor with metallic clanks. For a moment the slaves' advance felt victorious, an unstoppable tide pressing in on the Legion's line. Then a shadow fell from the sky. The Legion's great landing craft cut through the atmosphere and settled into the designated touchdown zones. Warriors poured from the ramps in a steady stream, joining the fighting at once and driving back the human wave that surged against them. "I have a very bad feeling about this," said the Lord of the Five-Pointed Heavenly Army the moment he set foot on the ground. He had always been cautious, and his eyes were already sweeping the field. The Xenos never activated their planetary defenses. It's as if they deliberately let us land. Urian, visor down, gave a slow, troubled nod. Even the dullest commander should have seen something off, and Astartes see what others miss. He added, "It could be that everyone on this world has been enslaved." The Lord of the Five-Pointed Heavenly Army raised his staff and pointed out across the plain. There, streaming toward them in an unbroken tide, were humans of every age, bent old men, exhausted laborers, youths with hollow eyes, and even infants crawling in the press. They flowed forward as if pulled on invisible strings, puppet bodies driven by someone else's will. So far, the First Legion had learned nothing of the Xenos who had wrought this. For now, the priority was clear. "Seize some of the mortals," the Lord ordered. "Bring them in. I'll set up a psychic array, see if we can pull any clues from their minds." The Lord of the Five-Pointed Heavenly Army said it to the Grand Master, then turned and walked briskly toward the landing craft. He barked orders to his psychers, motioning them aboard to begin assembling the array. Urian nodded and called for faster logistics. "Move the supplies up. We're dealing with the whole population of this world." Under cover of their brothers, 2 warriors were sent charging into the enemy lines to seize a number of mortals alive. On the landing craft, restrained at the center of the half-built psychic lattice, several captives writhed and raved, their faces twisted with fanaticism as they spat curses and nonsense. The Lord ignored their shrieks and bent over the ritual with practiced calm. He knew the Xenos' mind control was potent. Their psychic signature would be dangerous to probe. To be safe, he pooled the strength of 20 psychers, binding their wills together, so one careful attempt might be enough to pry open useful intelligence. As the incantation rose, the psychic energy of 20 Astartes fed into him, and his consciousness slipped free, plunging into the captive mortals' minds. After a heartbeat, the mortals at the center of the array suddenly burst apart into a choking mist of blood. The Lord of the Heavenly Host opened his eyes. His face had gone ash-pale. He murmured, "We're in deep trouble." Author's note: I've recently switched to the day shift, and I'm very unaccustomed to it. After getting used to staying up all night, writing during the day makes me sweat and my thoughts go fuzzy.